If you're contemplating using Excel to then print or create a PDF, one thing you need to bear in mind when you start playing around with formatting and making your sheet look really pretty is the fact that these grid lines by default do not print. So if we were to go to print preview, you would see that on the sheet there are no lines or borders. So if we want borders to print, we need to physically add those borders ourselves. Now the formatting is the same as everything else. You need to select the cells you want to format. So if I would like borders around these cells here, I would select the cells, and then the borders are controlled by this little one single option here. In the drop down, you can see you have a choice of a bottom border, a top border, left border, right border. So that's one of the sides of your selection. No border at all borders. So that's a border around every cell within the range. An outside border, so that's just around the range, so the internal cells do not have any borders. And a thick box border, it's a rectangle around the range, not around the individual cells. You can then have a bottom double border, a thick bottom border, top and bottom border, top and thick bottom border. So these options here are given as extras because they're quite useful for total rows, where you can have a single line above and a double line beneath. And then we even have the options for drawing borders and a grid and erasing the borders. So let's just go for all borders to start with. Now when you choose the all borders option, you get black borders. In fact, any of the borders you choose from this drop down, you get black borders. So I might choose no border and then go for a thick box border, and you can see that just puts a thick box around that selection, but not around the individual cells. If you would like borders that are not just black, then we need to go a little bit further. So we still make the selection of the cells. When we go to the font group, we go to the little pop-out option and choose border. Now in here, we can control the style of that border, and you can see there's quite a few choices and not just a single border. We can choose colors available to us from our themes or standard colors, and then we apply those borders. So at the moment in the preview, you can see I've got a thick border around the selection, so around the numbers. If I then chose the dotted dash option and then a blue option, and then clicked inside, the internal borders of my selected area would now have dot and dashed blue borders. So from the preview, I can see that that might look quite pretty. And then OK, and then a little click away to see if that's worked. I've still got the thick black border around the whole selection, and then individual cells have dotty blue borders. So when we go to print preview, we see those dotty blue borders. Let's just zoom in by removing the fit to page, and you can see there the borders much more clearly. So we can control the style of the border, the thickness of the border, and the color of the border. So if I select my title cells and then hold down Control key to select the left-hand title cells, I can go back to the same place, so the little pop-out, into the border options. Now I can see it's grayed on the bottom and the right, because some of the cells I've selected have borders on each of those sides. And in fact, these ones here have a border on the right, and these ones here have a border on the bottom. But I want new borders for these. I want a little thin dotted one. I want it in white, because we've got a dark background. And I'd like it on the inside of each of these cells. And because it's in white and the preview's in white, I can't see them. And I can't see any of the choices here either. So when you decide to go with white, always make the choice of style first. So OK, and we see that we've got white internal borders on those cells and those cells. So that's multiple cell selection of non-adjacent cells into the font and then border. And we chose white, so let's just choose black for a second. Choose that one and then white, reapply, OK. And we get dot dash in white between the cells. If you want quick borders, we use the shortcut icon here to apply borders to either side of the cells or all of the cells. If we then want to control color and a different border, then we need to go into the dialog box and border. And then you're in charge of the style, the color, the thickness. Whenever you create a new workbook in Microsoft Excel, you are given a single worksheet. Now we already know that you can have multiple worksheets, and in fact there is no limit to the number of worksheets you can have in a workbook. Obviously the file will get bigger and bigger, and at some point your machine will struggle to open the file, but the software itself has no physical limit on the number of worksheets you can have within a single workbook. how do we get more worksheets? Well, in a number of ways. The quickest is to go straight for this big plus button here and click. And hey presto, you get another blank sheet. So it's a quick plus there and you get another sheet. Alternatively, you can right click an existing sheet and choose Insert. This will give you a separate dialog box and choose Worksheet. OK. And you'll see you then get a new sheet, but this goes to the left of the current sheet. Whereas the plus will always put you a new sheet at the end, the right click always puts you one to the left of wherever you were when you right clicked. We can use the keyboard shortcut Shift F11, which will also insert you a new worksheet to the left of the current sheet that you're in. Notice that all these extra sheets are being numbered sheet and an incremental number. So the first one we asked for was sheet 1, the next was sheet 2, then sheet 3, then sheet 4. Regardless of whether we ask for them with a keyboard shortcut, a right click, or the great new big plus button. And then the final method for inserting a new worksheet is choose where you would like the new worksheet to become the left of, and up on the home ribbon we have Insert, which has a little drop down arrow to the right of it, and we can choose Sheet. And you'll see again, just like the right click and the keyboard shortcut, the new sheet appears to the left of the sheet you had selected and it gets the next incremental number. Now removing sheets, once you've got too many like this, right click on each sheet and delete, and you'll see the sheet's gone. Let's just put a little bit of content in here. And then went to right click and delete. We are presented with an error box that tells us that if we delete the sheet, you can't undo it. So you can't actually undo the deletion of a sheet. It didn't ask us on the previous sheet because the previous sheet was empty. This one contains some content. Deleting it will mean that I cannot get back that content. So you have to be a little bit careful about deleting a sheet, but we do get the dialog box to make sure we're making the right decision. Now you can get rid of more than one sheet at a time, which we achieve by multiple selecting sheets. So if I control click more than one sheet tab, so I could pick up all 3 here for example, and then right click, the delete option is still there. I'm asked if I'm sure I want to delete all of those sheets, and delete, and all 3 sheets are gone. So we can get new sheets and we can throw sheets away, with the caveat that if you throw a sheet away that has some content, that action is not an undoable action in Excel. A great tool that works well with data sheets in Excel is the subtotals tool. Now in order for the subtotal to work, we firstly have to sort the data by the column that we wish to subtotal on. So taking our employees data set, if we were looking to perhaps work out a total salary by county, our first step would be to sort the data by county. So we select anywhere in the county column and choose the A to Z option so that the counties are in alphabetical order, and we can see that that's worked. Stage 2 is then to go to the data ribbon and come all the way across to the subtotal tool here on the right. We choose the subtotal tool, that will give us the subtotal dialog box, and then we need to answer the questions correctly. At each change in, well, what I would like to happen is every time the county changes from one county to the next, so coming down this list, it will do all of County Durham, then go into the next county, then go into the next county. What would I like it to do? Well, I'd like it to sum, but there are other functions to choose from that we've seen previously. Count, average, max, min. There's even product, count numbers, standard deviation. We'll stick with sum. And what would I like it to sum? I would like it to sum the salary, but not the CV. We can then keep the defaults that are given here, which is to replace the current subtotals. So if there were some current subtotals in the sheet already, they would be removed. Obviously, if you're trying to add in second subtotals, you could remove that. And then there will be a summary below the data. So when I click OK, what I've asked it to do is to sum the salary every time the county changes. OK, and hey presto, it occurs for us. Now what happens is when it reaches the end of each county, as it's done there, it inserts a new row and says County Durham total. And then if we move across to the salary column, we can see it's worked out the sum of the salary. Now it does that using a function called subtotal, where 9 is an ID referring to the function sum, and then 02 to 013 is our range. So each time it sees a change in the county, it inserts another new row, so there we have North Yorkshire, and it sums the North Yorkshire values. Now, as well as inserting the row and inserting the total, We also get added in, you'll see on the left here, a system called outlining. Now what that allows us to do is actually compress and hide rows. So if I click 1 here, for example, that hides everything except the grand total, which if I scroll across, is now too large to see. So let's widen the column. That's the grand total. Whereas if I click 2, that shows me all the county subtotals effectively. And then 3 returns all the rows so we can see everything together. So this is subtotaling. Now it uses, if I use the 2, the subtotal command, and the reason it uses the subtotal command as opposed to the sub command is that we can add this subtotal here for the total that actually covers all the rows. But what it won't do is it won't subtotal the subtotals. Whereas if we put sum in each of these subtotals and then sum in the main grand total, it effectively will double count because it will add the sums as well as the individual values. And of course, it's very easy to control and set up. Should you wish to remove subtotaling, you go back to the subtotal option. That brings the dialog box back up and we choose remove all. And that takes away all of the subtotaling. The biggest caveat here is to remember to sort by the column you wish to subtotal on. Without that, you will end up with duplications in the subtotal. For example, if we go to the subtotal now, and don't choose the county, which is what we're sorted by, but choose one of the fields we're not sorted by. Let's go for the town city. We'll do the same thing, sum the salary. Okay. It manages to do it. If I do the 2 here, you'll see that Durham, Thirsk, Northallerton, Thirsk, Northallerton, Thirsk, Northallerton is repeated because every time the town changes to another town, it has to do another subtotal. Well, because we're not in town order, the towns keep recurring further down the list. So it doesn't make as much sense as it perhaps ought to. You need to make sure that you are within the data. So I would go to subtotal, remove all, then sort by the town, then subtotal at each change in town, sum the salary, okay. And now when we do the 2, you find we only have 1 total for each town. So as long as you bear in mind that little caveat of sorting the data by the field you wish to group on, then the subtotal tool will do wonders for you. In Excel, we have the ability to add comments to cells. Now this is preferential to using a cell adjacent to a cell to write a comment, which we could do. If we take our sales data sheet 2013, for example, next to the total on the sales summary, I might wish to write a little note to myself. And that works. But what happens if I wanted to write the note here to the 298? Where would I actually write that note? Perhaps over here with an arrow pointing across? It starts to get a little complicated. We can, however, add comments to individual cells using Excel's own interface. So let's take away this is provisional and assume we want to add a label to this cell here, 298. In order to add a label or comment, we go to Review on the ribbons and we click New Comment, making sure that you're actually in the cell that you want to add the comment to. That then adds a comment to the cell 298, and you can see a little yellow box has appeared there. It says training : Training is just the name of the person I'm logged in as. So if you're logged in as Bob, it will say Bob. It is editable. This is just a plain text box. And we type our comment. And then when you click away, the comment disappears. But we know the comment is there because there's a little red triangle to the top right of that cell. That is your indicator that there is a comment on a cell. And then when you hover, it pops back up. Move away, the comment disappears. So it's a great way of adding a note to a spreadsheet without having to use one of the existing cells. Now, if we want to re-edit that comment, we need to come back to the cell and click, and then go up to Edit Comment on the Review ribbon. That then opens up the text box to allow you to add more text or delete what's already there. And then again, you click away to complete the save. Now you can make your comments actually stay visible the whole time. If I click into the cell with 298, come up to the Review ribbon and click the option that says Show/Hide Comment. That makes the comment then visible so that when I do click away, the comment remains. I can click into it to edit it and also actually move the text box. But you'll see the arrow remains, so it's still pointing at that cell there. So even though I'm leaving the comment on the screen and I can resize that text box, it's just a simple floating text box really. It will stay on the screen because I've asked to show the comment. The arrow will keep pointing to that cell. If I click back in that cell, I can actually then turn off that comment. But when I then hover, you'll see it pops up in the same shape that I've resized it to, but not in the same location. It now appears right next to the cell. Should you ever need to remove a comment completely, that is delete it, again you click on the cell with the comment, come up to the top and choose delete comment. And you'll notice the little red triangle has gone, and so has the comment that effectively sat behind that cell. So that is cell comments. Can be added to any cell in your worksheet within your workbook. The red triangle at the top right hand side indicates the cell has a comment, and that comment can be made permanently visible or permanently invisible, in which case you have to actually click into the cell for it to pop up, or you can make it show, in which case it will stay on the screen at all times, and you can move the text box into a different location so that it does not obstruct any of your worksheet content. Now we know how to change the formatting of a given cell simply by selecting that cell, going to the home ribbon and changing the font size, color, background color, font color, alignment, etc. But what we can now do is change the appearance of a cell based on the value within that cell. So by adding a condition or a number of conditions, we can trigger a change in the formatting. So let's take the sales data 2013 file and January, and I'm interested for the moment in having a look at applying a conditional format to the cars sold for the North region. So I select the cell or cells that I wish to add a condition to. I then go to conditional formatting on the home ribbon, and in the little drop down I can choose highlight cells rules. Now in the right here I choose the trigger for a change in the format. So I'm going to choose greater than. Format cells that are greater than, and I can type a value in here or reference another cell. So let's change that to 50. So if the cell value becomes greater than 50, then I'd like to change the format to, and there's a list of predefined formats. We have light red fill with dark red text. We have light red fill, we have red text. It's a lot of red involvement. Or I can choose custom format to apply my own formatting. And you'll see some items are grayed out. I can't change the typeface. I can't change the size. But I can change to bold. I can change the color. Let's go for bright red. I can change the background color and the border. I won't change the border, but I'll change the background color to a yellowy color. And then OK. We then see that our rule says when the cell value is greater than 50, we're going to apply a custom format. OK. Now because the cell value is currently not over 50, we just look normal. Enter the cell and put a value greater than 55. And we see that as soon as that value is accepted, the format changes. Now that current condition only applies to cars sold in the North. If I want to take the same condition and apply it to the other sales cells in this sheet, then I can use the format painter. So I select that cell, use a little format painter, and then paste that format, which includes the conditional format, onto all of the sales cells for North, South, East and West, cars, planes and bikes. When I let go, we see that a number of them change because they're over 50 to the red text in bold on a yellowy background, whereas those that are below 50 stay in the default format. So this could drop down to 49 and we'd see it revert back to the default format. Now there's actually nothing to stop you having multiple conditions on the same cells. So all of these are checking for the value being greater than 50. If I highlight them all and go to conditional formatting and come down to highlight cells rules, I can add another rule which says less than, and let's go for 10. So if it's less than 10, then I'd like to use either one of the pre-built formats or my own custom format. Let's go for background in purple, font color in white to be really dramatic. OK. When I say OK, that will apply to the highlighted cells, and we can see we have two cells below 10 and they go into that white on purple scenario. So that's how to add conditional formatting to cells based on their value and then meeting criteria. Those criteria exist in this highlight cell rules pop out where you can check for values greater than, less than, between two values, equal to a particular value, checking for text that contains, and you can put a piece of text in, or a date occurring. So if you're checking a date set of cells, you can use date values, or you can even get it to highlight duplicate values. So instead of using that remove duplicates option that we've seen earlier, we could use the duplicate values condition, and it would then highlight the duplicate values for you to then look at manually. Just in the same way as we've been able to format cells to the number style that we want, we can also format dates to be in a style that we want. Taking our employees file, there is a column in here that holds their date of birth, and it's in the style of month/day/year. However, sometimes we want to change things. Now the formatting for dates is controlled in this little number section, and you can see it's already got date format as a choice. And we can choose between short date and long date, and there's even a preview of what you will get. So the long date will give me the full date. Don't forget that little hashes mean the column's not wide enough, because we now contain Tuesday, August 02, 1966. And I could do the same for the next one. Long date. And I could carry on down, or I could do them all in one go by making that change. Now, sometimes it's between the short date and the long date that you require. Let's use the next one, November the 15th. This time we need to go into the extra options, and you'll see that in the date selection, not only do we have what effectively is the default style, and then the default long style, we've got lots of other options that are sort of between there. We've got a shortened month. So I could choose that month there, and it will change my date to 15 NOV for November 48. Or I could lose the 15 and just have November 48. Or I can have it in the format of November 15, 1948. There's lots of little different style options within here that are effectively part way between the short and the long date. Having said that, that still might not be enough for you. We can customize our own date format. So we go back to the options. We come right down to custom, and you'll see in custom, it changes the choice you currently have into a set of code, which is here. M/D/YYYY, which is show me the month, show me the day, show me the year. I can replace this with my own abbreviations. And you can see as you start typing, it will do it. So D is 1, 2 Ds is 01, 3 Ds gives me Chew, and 4 Ds gives me Tuesday. So August the 1st, 1939 was a Tuesday, and we can get the cell to show us Tuesday by leaving 4 Ds, or 3 Ds for the abbreviated, 2 days for 01, and 1 D for 1. Now obviously, if you put 1 D and it's the 15th, it will still show 15. The difference between the D and the double D is if it's a single digit date, whether you get a 0 in front of it. So let's use a combination. Let's go for 3 Ds, Tuesday, 2 Ds, 01, and then I can use M for months, and you'll see that 1M gives me 8, 2 M's gives me 08. So if I put 1M and it's December, I will still get 12. But I want 08. Or do I want M? Do I want the abbreviated month, August? Or do I want the full month? In which case I put 4 M's. Then another space, and then I can use Y's. Now a single Y gives me 39, a double Y gives me 39, 3 Y's gives me 1939, and 4 Y's gives me 1939. So I'm going to leave that as the full year. OK, and that new format then gets applied to the cell I had highlighted. Now obviously I can do quite a batch at once. Choose one of the pre-built date formats or drop straight down to custom and build my own using D's, M's and Y's. So I could go with MM-DD-4Ys just to balance that. OK, and they're all changed into hyphen format. Now regardless of how you change the formatting, you'll see that in the formula bar, the date will always be displayed the same way, which is month/day/year. We know by now that when we enter text into a cell, it automatically left aligns, and when we enter numbers into a cell, they automatically right align. We don't need to live with those defaults. We can control the alignment of cells by ourselves. So if we want to change the default alignment for a particular cell, we need to select that cell. So it may be I wish to control car sold. So I need to select car sold. Now the alignment of that cell is controlled in the alignment section. And we have here the horizontal alignments, which are align left, align center, and align right. But not only can we control horizontal alignment, but we can control vertical alignment as well. And we have align bottom, align middle, and align top. So if we want our car sold cell to be center aligned horizontally, we click this icon here, and you can see the cell contents are then center aligned, and we can even vertically align them in the center. Now, as it stands, you can't tell that that's vertically aligned, but if we take the height of 2 and increase it, you You can then see that cars sold is vertically in the center, whereas the other cells are all at the bottom. So if I highlight all three of those, I can change their vertical alignment to be in the center and their horizontal alignment to be in the center. And we can do the same with any cells. You simply highlight the cells and choose an alignment option. So I might take all the labels down the left here and center align them. Let's take all the values and center align those as well. So we can control center, right, left, top, middle or bottom of a cell. Now, as well as being able to control that alignment, we can actually make the text go at an angle. So if I highlight my titles here, you can see we've got this little AB with an arrow. So let's go for slant to the right, and you can see everything then gets slanted to the right because of the direction of AB in our sample. We could go that way. We could go side on, or we could go side on the other way. Sometimes, if your titles are long, they work side on because it means you can narrow the columns slightly. So now that that's side on, I could actually make these columns a little bit narrower just to improve the presentation of my spreadsheet. So I still have to highlight the cell or cells I want to affect, and then I can control vertical alignment within that cell, horizontal alignment within that cell, and then what's referred to as orientation within a cell. All of those options, and a little bit more, are in the alignment dialog box, accessible from this little icon here at the bottom right of the alignment group. And we can see here that there's the horizontal options, there's the vertical options, there's even the ability to indent within a cell, wrap text that we've seen earlier. Instead of wrapping the text, you can choose shrink to fit, and it will reduce the size of the text to fit the cell size that you've left it with, reducing the font size. Merging cells we've seen in action, and then the orientation is controlled here graphically. So instead of choosing the right A, B and arrow, you can say, actually, I want the text to turn around that way, or I want it to be at an angle, 45-degree angle or a 90-degree angle, or 90 degrees the other way. But because you've got this little half circle, you can actually put that at any number of degrees you like. So it doesn't have to be 45 degrees or 90 degrees. We can actually set it within a degree of slant. Now you can make any changes you like in the alignment dialog box, and when you click OK, those changes will be made to the cell or cells you have selected. If you decide not to make the changes, you simply click cancel and take them back to your spreadsheet. So that's the alignment of the contents within a cell. Although we know that Excel is supplied as a massive sheet of rows and columns, those rows and columns have all been given the same width and height. We can adjust those column widths, adjust those row heights, so that they fit and display the data that we're after so much more easily. Let's take the sample file sample sales large that will require us to do some column width and row height adjustments. On the first sheet, forecast, there appears to be no problems. But if we go in and start to add people's surnames, so Bob Hayward, Rita Jones, and Sue Fernandez, we see that the text is not displayed. It is in the cell because we can see it appear in the formula bar, but it's not physically displayed on the screen because there are contents in the next column that cause the text to effectively be truncated at the edge of the cell. Now the easiest thing to do here is actually adjust the column width. So we go to A, and between the A and the B at the top here, you'll see your cursor changes into a vertical line with an arrow pointing to the left and pointing to the right. At that point, you can click and drag, and you'll see you get a little tooltip that gives you how wide you're going, both in pixels and in points. Now, when you adjust the column width, you adjust the whole column width. You can't have one cell that's not as wide as another. The whole column has to be adjusted. So a little bit of planning is sometimes required. Let's just go back and show you a quick way to do that. So they're not displaying. I need the column to go wider. I go to the top, and at that point there where I have previously grabbed and dragged, I'm just going to double click. It auto fits the column. So the column goes as wide as the widest entry. Now that's not a dynamic thing. If we were to make an edit, you'll see the column now is not wide enough because it has not auto fit again. You'd have to go back to the top, A to B, double click, tell it to auto fit. So that's widening a column. Always go to the top right hand side, between that letter and the next letter, grab and drag. So it's auto fit to the largest cell. Now on our actual sheet, column A is full of hashes. The column is not wide enough to display the dates or the numbers within that column. So we can do the same again between A and B at the top, double click, and we auto fit to the widest date. Now in actual 2013, they're all hashes. All of these columns are not wide enough to display. Notice that text doesn't care. It will attempt to go into the next cell. If it can't, it will go behind. Whereas we can see Sue is visible because it can sneak a little bit into E. So I need to auto-fit these columns. Well, I can do them all in one go. If I highlight the actual columns, click on the first and drag across to the last, that's highlighted all the columns all the way down to the bottom. Top right hand side, double click, auto-fits them all. Now you can do multiple select. I could take B, C and D for example, and just click and drag and it'll widen them all the same. Let's look at the sheet called large. Here we have a slightly different issue in that the columns aren't wide enough. Double click and that widens up. Now the description is slightly different. There's a lot of description here. If I were to try and widen that column, it becomes quite wide, and that might distract from what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to drag that back a little. And instead of widen the column, I'm going to increase the row height. Now I can effectively do it the same way. I select the row, go to the bottom of the row, you see you get the double-headed arrow, and I can click and drag as far as I need to go. Or, just like the columns, I can double click and it will go as high as it needs to. So there's that much text in there, it needs to go that high. If I were to slightly widen, you see then you've got a bit of extra space, so double click would then close that extra space up. So it goes as high as the highest cell effectively. Do 3 and 4 together, highlight both, just to the end of 4, which is the end of the selected rows, double click, and they go as high as they need to. So we can increase row width and decrease row width the same way. Select the row, drag in, I can even make them go very, very thin, or double click to go as high as the highest cell in that range. There is a large and major difference between cell contents and cell formatting. Should we wish to get rid of one or the other, it's different commands. Take our sales data H file for example. If I wanted to change north for a different region, I would click on the cell, press delete on the keyboard, and that would remove the word north, but not the formatting. That cell is still got a green background and white text. If I were to then type in Asia, you'd see that it still appears the same. So the delete key simply removes the contents, and that applies to any cell. Take away the 54, type in another number, and it's still formatted exactly the same. The cell is not changed. Now that seems quite useful, but it can have its drawbacks. If I pick a cell over here, for example, and put in my date of birth, fine, it works, it displays my date of birth. I then delete my date of birth, and the cell looks empty, and it is empty. However, the date formatting has been retained. If I then go back to that cell and try and type a number in and return, it actually converts that number into date format, which happens to be December the 13th, 1920. So you have to be a little bit careful when deleting cells. Do you mean just to take the content out, as we did in our table here? Or do you need to remove not only the content, but also the formatting? If you need to remove both, as we would do here, then a simple delete key is not enough. We actually need to delete the cell, which we do by going to the home ribbon, delete, there's a little drop down next to it, and cells. Now when you're deleting a single cell, you've got to decide where the other cells move. Do they all move up, or do they all move to the left? Well, let's move all the cells up. It actually makes no difference here because there's no further content. So let's say OK. That then looks the same as when we press delete, but this time it's removed the cell, which includes the formatting and the content, and has replaced it with the cell below, and all the cells below have all shifted up. So I now click on to I4 and type 7,358 in and press return. It retains because I've removed the formatting. So although just pressing delete key sounds great, that only removes the contents, I still have my pretty table, I can carry on typing. It can have its drawbacks, and it's just to be aware of that. When you delete something from a cell, you do not delete the formatting, and you could come back later and the formatting in there could be a totally different number format that could then make your spreadsheet look a bit funny. Now if we just want to remove just the formatting but not the contents, then we have another set of actions. Let's remove that from there. Let's put back my date of birth and then delete and put my number in that I was after. So let's go for 4632. Now that formats it as a date, but I don't want date formatting on there. So I have a number of choices. I could either go to the number and go back to general, and that will revert things back to, in this case, the raw number underneath, which is 4632. That's one option, undo. Or I could go to the home ribbon and go to cell styles. Now the cell styles can get really quite complicated, but all we're interested in here for removing all of the formatting we've ever put on is to go back to normal here, top left hand side, normal, and that takes all the formatting off. So that's color, everything, etc. And you can see we get 4632 again. So let's undo. So we get the date formatting back. And then the third option is actually just to pick a cell that you know has been untouched, so hasn't got any crazy formatting involved, and use the format painter. So we could format paint that cell there, and then paste that onto this cell, and I get my 4632. Now, dealing with that cell has only been dealing with removing the date formatting. If we were dealing with this cell here, and we wanted to remove all the formatting, so that would be alignment, orientation, green background, the white text, then the quickest thing to do here will be to go to the cell styles and choose normal. And you can see that reverts it back to aligned bottom, aligned left, black text, white background, and no border. So completely removes everything back down to the base formatting. So all you're needing to take on board here is that there is a difference between the contents and the format. And deleting one does not necessarily delete the other. It's done for a reason, so that when you have pretty tables like this and you delete some data, the pretty table remains. But then there are times when you want to remove the formatting, as we had over here when we had the date formatting on. And removing the formatting either involves deleting the whole cell, or removing the formatting by using the cell styles normal to tell it revert back to normal. Or you can take off the formatting that you don't like, so you could go to number and change that to general. You could go to the background and change it to no fill. So you could go through the steps of actually taking off the formatting that you don't require. Or cleverly, we can use our format painter again to format paint from a blank cell onto the cell that you wish to remove the formatting for. So that's deleting contents or formatting or both. In Excel 2013, the print dialog box and the print preview dialog box have effectively been amalgamated, and with that amalgamation have also been included a lot of the print settings. So all the things that we've run through for adding headers and footers, page margins, orientation, can all actually be controlled in one place. So we're going to use the employees D file here, file and print. We end up in this dialog box. If we go to print preview, we end up in the same dialog box. Now this setting of print or print preview is actually an amalgamated view. On the right hand side here, it previews the document and we can scroll through the pages. On the left hand side, we have the print dialog box. Now in previous versions, the print dialog box would have simply allowed you to select a different printer, which this does. We can change from one printer to whatever we have installed on this machine, choose the number of copies, and then physically carry out the print. So those bits still exist, but we have a whole new section here of settings, allowing us to control what we actually print. So the active sheets, the entire workbook, or a selection. But we can also choose which pages to print. So we can have a look through our 12 pages and actually pick which of those pages we would like to print. So from 1 to 3, 4 to 9. Would we like the document collated? Collation only has an effect if you print more than one copy of a file. If you print, say, 2 copies, it will print them when collated as pages 1 to 12 and then pages 1 to 12 again, rather than 2 lots of page 1, 2 lots of page 2, 2 lots of page 3. We can also control the orientation from in here, between portrait and landscape. So instantly seeing what that does to the print preview. So instead of having to do it on the page layout menu, we do it in here and we can see the immediate effect. The same with the page size. We can change that in here and see the immediate effect. We can change the margins in here and see the immediate effect. These are the same settings that you get from the page layout ribbon. Normal, wide, narrow, or into custom. We can control the scaling from within this same dialog box. So you can see we can fit sheet on one page. So that forces the width and the height to 1 and 1 and will squash 12 pages into one. Fit all the columns on one page. So we're telling it to shrink the width to one page. Fit all the rows on one page. In that case, we're trying to tell it to fit the height onto one page. Or no scaling, which is the default. So we can scale from the same dialog box. We don't have to go to the ribbon again. We can also access through the little link here, page setup. From here, we can control the scaling as a percentage as opposed to the little fit option. We can change the paper size and the print quality. We can control the orientation. We can control the margins. So rather than just the drop down of thin, wide and normal, we can come here and make individual settings. We can control header and footer, all from within the same print preview section. And on the sheet tab, we can control a few things that will print, such as grid lines, whether we want to print black and white, whether the page numbering goes down and then over. So we have 12 pages. At the moment, it will work its way down the sheet and then come to a second column and work down, or we can go over and down, in which case it will work across the rows first and then come down to page whatever we're up to and go across again. The only things that you cannot control from within page setup from the print preview area is you cannot set your print area and you cannot set the rows or the columns that repeat. Notice that these are grayed out. They would have to be set from when you're in the file itself from the page layout ribbon. But everything else we can control. On the print preview side, you see down the bottom right 2 icons. If we choose the left hand icon, this displays the margins and actually allows you to adjust them. So I can graphically adjust the margins. Don't forget that although we're looking at page 1, we are controlling the margins for the whole document. So we control the left hand margin, we can control the right hand margin. We can control the top margin and the header section. So the area between that bar and that bar is your header. So if you narrow up that too much, you haven't got much header. And the same at the bottom. We have one bottom bar that will take you down as far as it can for the bottom margin, and then one that allows a bit of space for the footer. So if you're not using headers and footers, you could drag that space right down to 0, forcing more content onto the page. So now we can see record with ID 38, whereas before we could only see up to 36. So that's just by turning on the margins in the print preview side, and we can turn them back off by clicking the icon again. So they're just an on-off option. Now with the margin showing, you can actually adjust the column widths in this print preview as well. You get a little black mark at the top of each column. So if I, for example, wanted to narrow up the address line too, I could do that from this print preview. Narrow that up slightly. So this amalgamated view of print and print preview allows you to do print preview on the right hand side here, where we can adjust the margins graphically and even the column widths graphically. Allows you to decide a number of copies and which printer to send the document to, and the big button to actually carry out the print, and then a whole raft of settings that we can control here and more through the page setup. Pretty much all the control can be done from within one screen. We've already covered and looked at how we can do our own formatting on a spreadsheet so that we can colour the background in, we can change the font size, we can change the font colour, we can change the typeface, and a number of other items. But that formatting can be greatly increased and streamlined if we make use of table formatting. Now, in order to make use of table formatting, we must first select an area to format as a table. So if we take the working file Sales January, we have in here a set of data that has already been formatted to some degree, changed the typeface, the background colour, and made it look quite nice. But what I'd now like to do is to change this into table formatting. Now, in order to do that, we can either highlight the cells we're interested in, which is those ones there, or we can simply just click into an area. Then on the home ribbon, we come up to Format as Table. In the little drop down, we can then choose between different table styles. We've got a sort of section of light styles, section of medium styles, and a section of dark styles. So you'll notice there's a lot more background color with these. Let's choose this orangey one here. Table style dark 3. It then makes an assumption as to the size of your table. Now it's chosen A1 to E6, and that's a great assumption because that's all of our data. Most of the time it will get the table size correct. If not, you can use the browse button here and then manually highlight the data table you wish to use, and then the go back button to take us back to the create table dialog box. Does your table have headers? Yes, it does. Top row here are all headers. So that's okay. What you'll then notice is the style we've chosen then gets applied, and we then have a Table Tools Design ribbon. See, this has appeared here, Table Tools Design. Now if we click out of our table, that disappears. We click back in, it reappears. So it's a context sensitive ribbon, but it does not exist until the first time you format some cells as a table. Now we have extra options. You can see we have header row activated, but we don't have total row activated. If we activate that now, it actually inserts the total row for us. and it's formatted slightly differently. Now it has placed a single formula in there on the right, which is subtotaling that end column. That's not much use for what we're trying to achieve, it's just counting. So let's put in our own total function. Equals sum of that range there. And then we can replicate across. So the formatting has been arranged by the table formatting, and it has a darker background. We can have a first column. You can see that's changed the first column to slightly different than the other columns. A last column, and that changes the last column to be slightly different than the other columns. That would be more appropriate if the last column contained totals. So we'll turn that off. And you can even have banded columns. Now banded columns mean that every other column is a slightly different background color. Now we've got banded rows on and they don't quite work together. So we either have banded columns or banded rows. Working together, they just tend to mix and match a little. We can have the filter button or not. It is there, we have little drop options. But if I take that tick out, the filters disappear. So that's formatting a set of data as a table. Now we chose an already pre-formatted area, and it's not quite been able to control these blue headings and our merged cell at the top. It's actually unmerged them and placed in column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4 as our headings. Not quite what we were after. If we took some raw data from scratch, then you'd see that we could format much easier. So let's use another working file. And you'll see the file's called Sales February. Plain as anything. We haven't done any formatting at all. And you'll see that here, if we use the format as a table, we have much more control and have less distractions. So again, we just need to click in. We don't need to highlight the data. Excel will pick that up for us. Format as a table. We have the same choices, a light set, a medium set, or a dark set. I quite like the dark. Let's go for the dark green. It's selected the right set of cells, so it's okay. And then we see in place our banded rows. Now we can make changes as we've done previously. We can take off the filter buttons. We don't want those at the moment. And we can see our headings are different. They're now grey on black because of the style we've chosen. We can choose different styles from our ribbon. Go down to a light style. Perhaps a medium blue one, that's fine. And then the other options we have, as well as the table style options, which we've looked at already. We can refresh the data. We can export this data table to a SharePoint list, or even to Visio if you have Visio installed. We can insert a slicer, and we will look at those when we do the data exports. And we have the options for removing the duplicates, summarize with a pivot table, and we will explore pivot tables to come. Convert the table area to a range, so that would be a named range that you could then use in other formulas. And we can even give the table a sensible name. At the moment it's called table 2 because it's the second table we've created. So that's converting a set of data that looks tabular into a physical table for Excel. And that just makes it easier trying to control the formatting of the table. Now we've seen copy and paste in action, but what we're going to have a look at now is copying and pasting formulas and functions, and you'll see that Excel knows what we are talking about. Let's take our math sample D and look at the sales sheet. And we have a little mini table of information here. Cars, planes, bikes, north, south, east and west. And what we'd like to do is add up the total of cars sold. And we know we can do that using the sum function. So that's equals sum, open brackets, highlight our range, close the brackets and return. And we get the result. Now we could do exactly the same for planes. Equals sum, open brackets, in this case using C2, C5. However, if we were to use copy and paste back to my cars formula, now the cars formula is equals sum B2 to B5. If I were to copy that and then paste that into here, you would assume it'd want to add up B2 to B5, but it doesn't. Click onto the cell but not into the cell and use whatever your preferred method for copy is. Now we know in Excel that once you've copied you get your marching ants, so you know it's working. And then we can go to planes and enter. And we see the total is not actually adding up B2 to B5. It's giving me 116, which must be adding up C2 to C5. Double click. Now this works because in essence what Excel is remembering is not the actual cell references, but their relative position to where you are at the time. So we started off here and we think the formula is equals sum B2 to B5, but actually Excel thinks of that formula as let's add up the 4 cells that are directly above me. When we then copy that formula and paste it here, it wants to do exactly the same thing. It wants to add up the 4 cells directly above it, which means, logically, if we then do another copy and paste into bikes, it then wants to add up the 4 cells above that cell, which is these 4. And as if by magic, it works. Now that will work not just vertically, but also horizontally. We know we can type a formula in here, equals sum, open brackets, those 3 cells. Now this time it's remembering not that it's adding up B2 to D2, but that it's adding up the 3 cells that are immediately to the left of me. So when we then copy that cell, and let's be confident and paste it all the way down. So I'm highlighting all 4 of those cells. And again, as we saw earlier with the paste in Excel, although I've only copied 1 cell, I can paste the contents of that 1 cell onto more than 1 cell just by selecting the cells I would like to paste into and press return. And you can see that the result is different, so something must have happened. Now we can check each formula out. That's adding up that row. That's adding up that row. That's adding up that row. And that's adding up that row, which just so happens to be our grand total. So let's copy and paste the formulas. Takes the formula, pastes it into its new location, but remembers the relative path of the cell references being used. We can do exactly the same here, where there's no sum required. We're just using our multiplication operator to take the unit price of a banana and multiply it by the quantity we have purchased. And the grand total is then $3.09. Now I can take that formula and paste it into all of these cells because I'm wanting to do exactly the same. Multiply those two, etc. Paste. And we see that it works. It's the 2 cells to the left of it, multiplied by 1 cell to the left. We could do it over here. I want to add this column up. We know we can do that with AutoSum. That puts the right formula in. And then another way of copying, as we saw earlier, was to use the fill handle. Now if I do that with a formula, so I take that little corner there, drag to the right as far as I need to go, and let go, it will effectively copy and paste that formula across into these other columns. If I double click here, I can see it's picking that column up. And the same with Bob's column, double click, and it's picking up Bob's column. So the copy and paste facility is achieved through the little plus, in this case, the fill handle. And we did see that it did copy when we dealt with text and 1 single cell of numbers. Obviously, when you start mixing numbers and then dates, it will fill a series. But in this case, with formulas, it will always copy the formula into the subsequent cells. So that's copying and pasting formulas and functions. Now we know all the copy and paste options that exist in Excel, using the keyboard shortcuts, using the toolbars at the top, using the fill handle, using right click. Well, they all work when you're copying and pasting functions as well, with a slight difference in that the function does get copied and pasted. It doesn't copy and paste the result. It copies and pastes the actual formula, but in its new relative position. Let's use the working file copying functions. Now on the shopping sheet, there is a simple shopping list in which we have a number of items, the quantity we wish to purchase, and the unit price each. We need to then enter the formula here to work out the total for each line. So if we do that for bread, it equals the quantity cell, so B2, multiplied by the price cell, which is C2, and then return. So straightforward multiplication. Now when you look at the result, we see 446. When we look at the formula, we see B2 times C2. So we copy the cell with the formula in. So I don't need to go in and highlight. I effectively need to be on the cell. So that's the big white cross. Copy by whatever your preferred method is. And we know we get the marching ants when we do that in Excel. Select the next cell you wish to paste on and then paste. Notice the result is not the same. It's now 1629, which is 3 times 543. If I look at the formula, we'll see that it's now looking at cells B3 and C3. The reason for this is that Excel formulas are treated as relative. So when you copy and paste them from one location to another, they retain the same relative addresses. So it doesn't retain B2 times C2. It effectively retains, if we look back at the formula, remember that I am multiplying a cell 2 to the left of me by 1 to the left of me. So when we paste it into here, it does exactly the same thing. 2 to the left of me by 1 to the left of me. If we were to do exactly the same thing, copy that formula and paste it over here, So nowhere near our little table, paste. The result is 0, but when we look at the actual formula, it's still doing exactly the same thing. 2 to the left of me multiplied by 1 to the left of me. So the relative addressing is what is important with your Excel functions. Once you're happy with the relative addressing, you'll be quite happy copying and pasting formulas. So let's delete that one there. So having got this to copy and paste into here, I could copy again. And in fact, I could paste into all of those. If you remember, we did that with a piece of text. We took a single text value and pasted it into many cells, and it pasted exactly the same text value. If we do this with a formula, we copy a single formula, we paste it into multiple cells, it will paste that formula in its relative address into all of those cells. If I now press return, all of those cells receive that formula, but they all display a different value because their formula has now been pasted in relatively. If we look at each cell, you can see 9.8 is 4 multiplied by 2, 45. But the formula is now looking at these two cells. So it's again 2 to the left times 1 to the left each time. And every time you copy and paste a formula, it will always do it relatively. Now we can do pretty much the same thing in our other sheets. Let's look at the sales sheet. This is displaying our sales from Monday to Sunday for shop 1 to shop 8. Now we could add this column up by saying equals sum, open brackets, all of those cells, return, and then we could copy that formula and paste it into each of these cells. Now we saw previously that we can copy using the fill handle. Well, that also applies to formulas. So we take the little fill handle and drag to the right until we get to shop 8, and each formula is then effectively copied into the next cell with its relative address. So if I just pick on shop 4 summary, we can see that it's copying the cells above it. So the same as we've done before, it's the relative address that is copied, not the result. We can do the same with the rows. Equals sum, open brackets, all of those values there, close the brackets, return, 56,000. We can take the little fill handle and drag to the bottom. Now with the fill handle, you can do a double click and it will copy the contents as far down as Excel feels it is appropriate to go. And that's usually as far down as there are values on the left. It doesn't make any difference doing that or doing copy or just dragging the handle. The result is the same. The relative address of the formula is copied. So this one here is looking at those cells there. Our bottom corner here, the grand total, can either be a copy of that one, in which case it will copy those cells, or a copy of that one, in which case it will copy those cells. So let's take that one down, and it then looks at these cells here. So it's actually copying the shop totals to give us a grand total of 812,800. Now the last sheet in this workbook, the non-consecutive one, shows a file we were playing with similarly earlier on, where we have Bob, Alice and Mary's fruit consumption over the 5 days of a week. And we already have a formula in place here. So this is adding up non-consecutive cells, and it's adding up B2, B7 and B12 and giving us a total for fruit. Now if we copy that formula and actually paste it into all of those cells there, so that's all 3 food items, fruit, veg and meat, for all 5 days of the week, and then return to paste, it pastes in the relative address. So if I were to just look at that 15 in the Wednesday and bring the formula up, we can see that it's picking up the correct values. It's veggies on Wednesday, veg on Wednesday, veg on Wednesday. So even in this case where we're using non-consecutive cells, because we're effectively after the same relative location, it works. And we can pick out one formula, paste it in this case, to 15 cells, and the result is the right result. It's picking up the right cells to produce the right sum. So that's copying formulas in Excel. We can do exactly the same as we've done for all other copy and pastes when you're using straight text and numeric values. The thing to bear in mind when you do it with a formula is it doesn't copy the result of the formula, it copies the relative address of that formula. So you need to be careful where you're pasting it. Now logically the bottom of column and the end of rows works, and in this case our little mini table here works because the relative address of everything is in the same place. Using the recommended charts is not the only way of creating charts in Excel. We have 2 other methods. Let's take our sales data 2013 and explore these 2 methods. So in January, I'm thinking I quite like the idea of a chart. I select the data I would like to include in my chart, then go to Insert. I avoid the recommended charts, but in the rest of this section, there are all the main chart types, and they all have little drop-down arrows, so you can choose the subcategory. So this is a column chart. I've got an option for 3 different 2D columns, and notice as I move, the graph is actually created in front of me. 3D clustered, 3D stacked, 3D 100% stacked, and then 3D columns. Or perhaps a bar chart. And again, I can hover through and I will get a little preview of what it will look like. Or a line chart. I quite like that one. Line with markers. Creates my chart, which I can resize to fit how I would want on my sheet. Now that's the normal method. In February, if I wanted to create a graph of the same data effectively, but obviously for a different month, so it's the same cell range, so not using the insert chart and picking a chart type, not using the recommended charts to see what Excel suggests for me, but by actually doing a keyboard shortcut, F11. So if I were to do that now with the data selected, I get a chart. It uses the default chart type, the bar chart, and this time it actually creates it not as an object within the sheet, but as a separate sheet. So we can see here chart 2 has been created, not as an object inside February, as it does when we do an insert chart, but the keyboard shortcut creates one on its own and creates it in chart 2. Now we can move the chart if we don't want it to be its own sheet by choosing Move Chart from the Chart Tools Design ribbon and say we would like it as an object in February. OK. And then I can move it where I want it and resize to fit. Likewise, if it is an object inside a sheet, I can move it so it has its own sheet. So the January one, for example, I'll make sure I select my chart and then Move Chart. I can create it as a new sheet and call that Jan chart. OK, and we see Jan chart gets created and my graph fills the whole sheet. So it's down to personal preference or the makeup of your particular workbook where you would like the chart. It doesn't even need to be either in its own sheet or in the sheet with the data. You could put all of your charts in one sheet. So if I were to add a new sheet and just call it Charts, I could move the January chart, so that's Chart Tools Design Move Chart, into the Charts sheet. Notice how the January chart sheet just then disappears. And let's move that over there. And then I can move the February one into the same place. So Move Chart as an object in Charts is then removed from February and placed in my chart sheet. That way you could perhaps have all of your charts together for each of the months of the year. So we have create a chart, selecting your data, insert, choose the chart type, and then the subchart type from the drop down, or the quick keyboard shortcut for creating a chart, which is F11 on the keyboard. Now when it comes to conditional formatting, so far we've used the options that are available to us by just selecting from lists. If you've used it quite frequently and you get to know it quite well, you've got a lot more control if you create the rule from scratch. So using the sales data 2013, we're going to use the May file this time. And what you'll find if you go to conditional formatting, the new rule option. So that skips past all of these predefined options and goes straight into new rule. Now we can choose to format all the cells based on their values, format only cells that contain values, format only top or bottom, format only values that are above or below average, format unique and duplicate values, or use a formula to determine which cells to format. So I'm actually going to stick with all cells based on their values, but in our drop list at the bottom, we can customize what those values might be and what might occur. So if I were to choose icon sets, you can see here we can control the icon set that we would like, which you can do from the drop list as well. You can choose which icon set you like, and I'm going to choose that one. But as well as being able to choose the icon set, you can then choose when those values kick in. So we're going to get a green tick when the value of the selected cell is equal to or greater than 67. Now that's 67%, not 67 value. Now you can change that to a number, to a formula, or to a percentile. So it will be the top 67%. So I'm going to change that to a number. So when the value of that cell is greater than or equal to 200, you will get the green tick. When the value of the cell is greater than or equal to 100, you will get a yellow exclamation mark, and you will get a red cross when it's less than the 100. So effectively these criteria drop. So when the value is more than or equal to 200, then you'll get a green tick. When it's less than 200, because it's taken this value here, and greater than or equal to 100, then I get an orange exclamation mark and I get a red cross. When it is less than, it will change to 100 when I come out of here. And OK, and we see we get a red cross. If I use the format painter to then copy that conditional formatting onto all those cells, then we can see we get green ticks when we're over 200 and crosses when we're below 100. We haven't got anything in between, so let's make that 125. When we get the orange exclamation mark, the amber warning symbol. So that's creating your own rules. Conditional formatting, new rule. Make sure you select the cell or cells you are dealing with first before you enter the new rule dialog box, where you can control pretty much anything. Format only cells that contain, so the cell value is between, and we could put two cell values here, X and Y, or we can actually link two cells. Then we can define the range ourselves. So we could link to that cell there and link to that cell below it. So I3 and I4, when the value is between I3 and I4, let's make it go bold and italic. Okay, okay. Now that's only going to affect that cell there, but I3 and I4 are here. So when it's between 25 and 100, it will go bold and italic. And it is between 25 and 100, so it goes bold and italic. So you are really in charge of the conditional formatting, how it's driven, what triggers it, and then what happens after the conditional format has been triggered as to what format to take place. Now, when you first start Microsoft Excel 2013, you'll be presented with a big green bar on the left-hand side that will list any recent workbooks here. It will give you a link here to open other workbooks, so effectively ones that aren't classed as recent. And on the right-hand side here, we have a list of various templates. So we could choose an expense trends budget template, a channel marketing budget template, and these are pre-built Excel files for you to make use of. If you're happy not using any of those and you want to start from scratch, you choose the blank workbook here. That then opens you a blank workbook with a single worksheet ready for you to start working by typing in the relevant cells. So I could type something in A1, something as easy as my name. And then we need to save the file. Until you actually save the file, if your machine were to crash or if you were to close without saving, you would lose any of the work that you've done. So saving is vitally important. Now there are a number of ways of saving. We could just simply click the little save icon on the quick access toolbar, or we could go to File and come down the various list of options. The first of which is Save. You would use this if your file already has a name. If you try to save a file without a name, you're effectively choosing Save As. So if I choose Save Now, it's exactly the same as me choosing Save As. And you'll see it actually jumps into the Save As section. I then need to tell it where I would like to save. So I've got choices here against my places. Now the places you have here will depend on whether you are logged in to your SkyDrive or to your Windows account. If you're not logged into your Windows account, you'll only have a choice of computer. SkyDrive is on here because I'm logged into SkyDrive account. And then we also have a SharePoint account here where I can save files. So I could choose SkyDrive, I could choose computer, or I could choose to add a place to my list of places. This allows you to effectively bookmark a location for you to save files in. Quite useful if you're commonly saving those files in one place. For the moment, I'm going to choose computer. Choosing computer, it then gives me a list of recent folders. So these are places I've recently saved files to, or I can browse my machine. Click Browse, it then opens up Windows Explorer, go into your Documents area, and then you can give the file a sensible name. Save the file. I then get taken back into Excel, and we can see by looking at the title bar at the top that my file now has a name, myfirstworkbook.xlsx. Now you'll know already that that is the extension for Microsoft Excel 2013 format files. Now as you carry on and do further work, Fred is my dog. To keep the same name, we simply go to Save on the quick access toolbar, Control S on the keyboard, or File and Save. This time when I choose Save from the File menu here, I'm not given a list of options because the file already has a name. I'm effectively just topping up the save as I go. So that's creating a brand new blank workbook simply by starting Excel and choosing the blank workbook option, making any changes, doing your work, and doing a file and save to give your file a name for the first time, and then saving just by doing file and save, Ctrl S, or the quick access toolbar save icon. You may wish to actually create your own Excel templates. So instead of relying on Microsoft to supply you with some templates, you may create your own Excel file and think this would make a good template. I can use it year after year. So if we take our sales data 2013, well, the first thing I would need to do is remove the data that pertains to 2013. So I'm going to click on Jan and then shift click on December to join all 12 sheets together, and then simply remove the values for each of the vehicles and each of the regions, but not remove the formulas. So I've selected the cells I want to remove and delete, and that will have removed all of those from all 12 of the months. Back in the sales summary, everything's then 0. Then I would like to save this as a template, but before I save it as a template, I need to tell Excel where I'm storing my templates. So we go to File, Options, Save, and we can see here we've got default local file location, and that's the training documents area, and then the default personal templates location has not yet been defined. Well, I'd like to actually make that a subsection of my documents. So let's copy that address and then put \templates. So I'm going to create a templates folder within my documents. That way I know where they are. But the biggest important thing here is I've told Excel where they are. Then I need to save my file as a template. So I go to File, Save As. Now I need to navigate to my templates folder. So that's Browse, Documents, Templates, and within here I need to save this file as an Excel template. Currently it wants to be saved as an Excel workbook, so I need to change the Save As type to Microsoft Excel template. Now if my template actually contains macros, then I would need to save it as an Excel macro enabled template. But for the moment it's just an Excel template, and you can see I already have one in the templates folder called Book 2. And then we save this one, where it doesn't need 2013 on there because it's going to be a template for all future years sales data. So salesdata.xltx for Excel template. Save. And you'll notice then in the title bar it says XLTX. So this is now the template that I am dealing with and editing and making changes to. Once I'm happy I have the template finalized, I would then do the final save because it's already a template in the templates folder, and then close the file. And then it's ready for me to make use of in a new document. So having saved my template, if I then want to use that as the basis for a new document, I go to File and New, just as I did before when I was using the Excel templates. And then you'll notice there's two little options, Featured and Personal. If I choose Personal, it shows me all my Excel templates in the templates folder. Now the reason it knows to look in the templates folder is because I told it where my templates were, and then it goes and looks in that folder and shows me all the Excel templates it can find. Now it's found Book 2, and it's also found sales data. If I open sales data, what I then get is a brand new file. So you can see at the top here it says sales data 1. So this is now an Excel file. Just as when you use the normal template, a blank document, you get Book 1, then Book 2, then Book 3. The same happens here. It's called sales data, so the first copy you use of it is sales data 1. If you use the second copy in the same session, it will become sales data 2. I can now use this and add in my relevant numbers. And when I'm ready, actually do a save. And then I'm prompted as to where to save the file because it's not been saved yet. I've effectively created a brand new file based on my sales data template. And then I can save this perhaps in my SkyDrive or on my computer. So let's save it in our local file. It's going to be sales data 2014. And then it's saved. So you can create your own templates, saving them in your template folder, which you need to tell Excel about. You only need to tell Excel about it once. After that, it knows where the templates are. And then you can make use of those templates just as you can of the built-in templates by doing File, New, but then choosing Personal so that it only shows you your personal ones. Once you've used one of your personal templates once, it will actually appear in the featured list anyway, so that there's less clicks for you to then use it again. Headers and footers are bits of text or information that you want to print at the top or the bottom of every single piece of paper. So you set it once for your spreadsheet and it will print on every piece of paper within that spreadsheet. So if we take employee C, for example, and do a print preview, you'll see that this currently requires 6 pieces of paper. If we were to add a header, it would appear here at the top of every single one of these 6 sheets. If we were to add a footer, it would appear here at the bottom of every single one of these 6 sheets. So how do we add a header and or a footer? Well, we go to page layout. On the page setup grouping, there is no header and footer option. We need to go into the page setup options. One click brings up the page setup dialog box with its own little tab for header/footer. And there's lots of things we can control in our header and footer, but the basics are to get some content into either the header or the footer. Now, to make things easier for you, there's a little drop list of common options provided both for the header and the footer. And in that drop list, you'll see there's an option for page 1, so that will put the page number on. Page 1 of, that will put the page number and the number of pages on. Table employees, that's the name of the file. We can put confidential, today's date, and the current page number. We can put the full file name. We can put the full file path. We can put the sheet name and the page number. We can put the sheet name and confidential and the page number. We can put the file number and the page number, etc. So there's a lot of shortcuts for headers and footers, and you'll find the same options that you've got there in the header drop-down are in the footer drop-down. So that's a quick way of creating a header or a footer. So in our header, we could say, actually, let's put the sheet name, and then in the footer, let's put page 1 of question mark. I can then say OK to accept that and go into print preview. And you'll see at the top of each sheet, there's the name of the sheet, so the tab, the worksheet, and there's page 1 of 6. And on the second page, page 2 of 6, and still TV employees at the top. So that's page setup, header, footer. And I've chosen a couple of the defaults. If I remove those by choosing none and none, I can actually customize my own header and footer. So let's do a custom header. Now what you'll find in the custom header dialog box is it's split into 3 sections. A left-hand section, anything you place in here will be aligned to the left. A right-hand section, anything you put in here will be aligned to the right. And a center section, anything you put in here will be center aligned. So first decision is to decide which of the 3 sections of your header to use. And then we've got some shortcuts here. This is the page number. This will insert the number of pages. This puts the date that you're currently working on the file. And the same with the time. Or we can insert the path for the file. That's quite common in the footer, so that you can see if you've got a print copy or a PDF copy where the original Excel file is. We can insert the file name, so that's without the path. We can insert the worksheet name. We can insert a picture even, so a logo. And then this option here is to format that picture, so that's currently grayed out. So in the middle here, if I actually just wanted to type Guy Vaccaro's employees, that physical text will appear at the top of every sheet. Now if you put text in, you can format it by highlighting the text and choosing this little A here for font. And that'll bring up the font dialog box. Notice you don't have a massive amount of control, but we can change the typeface, the style to bold or italic, the font size, the color, and then underline and strike through. So let's push the font up to be 20 and in red, and let's have it double underlined. That's okay. So that's now going to be in the middle at the top of every page. At the right hand side, let's insert the sheet name. Now if I want to format that, I can do the same. I can highlight it. Notice it's put ampersand tab. So it's effectively a little function so that it always pulls out the sheet name. And we'll push the font up a little more navy. On the left hand side, let's have the file name. So ampersand file. And change that to green and go up to 14. So we've gone a bit crazy in our formatting, but it's just for demonstration. Okay. And the custom footer, you'll see exactly the same options. A left section, a center section, a right section. So on the right hand section, I could put page and then the page, which is ampersand page. So the ampersand page will give me the actual page I'm on. The word page, we'll just type the word page on the file. So that's okay. And you see that's the bottom right of the footer. So we can then go OK. print preview. And we can see our header, which is a little crazy mixed up font colors. And then page 1, we move to the second page, page 2, and the headers remain the same. So that's the header and the footer. The header goes in the top section, the footer goes in the bottom of every single page on that worksheet. So we control that through page setup, header and footer, choose a pre-built one from the drop list for either or go into custom header or custom footer to add your own customized options, bearing in mind that the header and the footer is split into these 3 areas: a left-hand area center aligned, a center area center aligned, and a right-hand area right aligned. To remove the headers and footers at any stage from a given sheet, you come into the same area, the page setup, and just choose none from the drop list. And that will take out all the headers, and then none in the footer will take out all the footers. Say OK, and you'll then find you then have no headers and no footers. So the space is clear. We've already seen and played with the fact that the fill handle can also fill some lists for us. That is, if we start with January, take the fill handle and drag, it will automatically start going through the rest of the year. The same with the abbreviated Jan. That will go through the rest of the year and start again once we get to the end. You don't actually need to start in the beginning. If we take June, for example, that will quite happily continue to the end of the list and then start again. We've seen it work with shortened days of the week. So Mon to Sun, start again, and the full abbreviations, Monday, etc. And we know that week 1 doesn't have to go from the beginning either. If we start with the, it goes to Sun and then starts again with Mon and then goes right around the list. Now these are called custom lists, and you can actually create your own custom lists of sensible things that you'd want to reproduce in list format, either vertically or horizontally. So if you work for a company, you may have to repeat typing in the names of all the departments. So it'd be quite good if you could add those in as a list. Type one of them, grab the handle and fill all the rest of the departments in. So we need to create a custom list ourselves. So we go to File, come down to Options, and then Advanced. And then pretty much at the end of the Advanced options, so scroll right to the bottom, you'll see we have this little option here for Edit Custom Lists. If I click, I enter the Custom List section, and we can see in there the 4 custom lists that already exist in Excel. The Sun, Mon, Tu, Wed, etc. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Jan, Feb, Mar, January, February, March, April. Now we can add our own list by effectively clicking on New List, then go into the list entries, and we could type our department names in. So we could say Personnel, Sales, Warehousing, Transport, and Admin. So those are the 5 departments that exist in my company. So I'm going to add them in as a custom list, and then I click Add. And you can see that 5 options then appear here as a new list option. OK, OK, and then back to Excel. All I need to do now is actually just remember one of those departments, grab the fill handle and drag, and you'll see it repeats the list in uppercase. If I were to keep it in title case, take my little fill handle and drag, you see it repeats in title case, but the actual text values are the same. And just like our other lists, we can start anywhere we like, and it will just continue to the end and start again. They also work horizontally. Let's take transport across. That becomes transport, admin, personnel, sales, warehousing. So that's adding in a custom list where we go to the custom list dialog box and type the entries. There is another way of creating that custom list, and that is to have the people already, in this case salesmen, in cells, and you want to pick those cells up and create a custom list from it. So I highlight the cells, I then go to File, Options, Advanced, Edit Custom Lists. You can see our personnel one remains here. This is the list I've got highlighted, B3 to B9, and then I click Import. And you see it brings in all the values that are currently in B3 to B9 as a new list entry, and I now have Alice, Bob, Mary, John, Peter, Fred, Sarah. OK. OK. And then we just need to test that that works by typing any one of them. And when you drag down, they replicate. And when we drag across, so let's pick on Bob, they replicate. And if we drag backwards, they go backwards through the list. Ideal for anything that you repeat type headings for, such as in this case salesman or departments or areas, counties or countries even. Anything that you repeat regularly, think custom list. It's not a workbook setting effectively, it's an Excel setting, so it will be available in any other files that you have open in Excel. Probably the most powerful tool you can master in Excel is the cut, copy and paste commands. Now effectively cut and copy are pretty similar. The difference is that one will cut, therefore remove from the page, whereas the other will copy, and then we use paste with either cut to then paste the item into its new location, or paste with copy to then paste a copy of the item into its new location. We're going to explore a few of those just to get you going and see how the real power works in Excel. Let's look at the basic mechanics first. Using the working file, cut, copy and paste. We have here a list of different bits of text, and what we're going to do is effectively look at taking a copy and then pasting somewhere else. So if I take the cell Mavis, I need to copy this cell. We could go up to the home ribbon and choose the copy option here. And you see you get little marching ants around. Now to lose those marching ants, you just press escape on the keyboard and that effectively clears the clipboard. Now we can also copy her by right clicking and copy. And you see we get the same little marching ants. So again, escape. Or we can do Control C for copy. And again, you get your little marching ants. That's the real helpful bit in Excel. Any other program, when you copy something, you're not really sure you've copied it until you paste. In Excel, you know you've copied it because you get your little marching ants going round and round and round the selection, whether that be one cell as we have here. If I escape that, we can actually highlight a number of cells and do a copy. And you see we still get the marching ants around that area of cells. So escape, let's go back to Mavis. So we're going to copy Mavis. All we then need to do is move where we'd like Mavis to now be pasted. Let's say, for example, go here to I2. And then we can paste. Now, the keyboard shortcut is Control V, and you see that Mavis appears. If I then move to I3, Mavis is still on my clipboard. I can paste by clicking paste. We could move down to I4, right click and paste. Now there are lots of little paste options that we'll explore shortly, but the main thing here is the first one is just to paste what you've got on the clipboard. Paste and Mavis appears. So we can Control V, we can right click, we can use the toolbar button on the home ribbon. Now all the time that we're doing all this pasting and moving around, Mavis is still on the clipboard. There is one other quick paste, I'll call it, in Excel, which I really like. We select where we'd like to go and we simply press enter. And you see that that also pastes Mavis in. It's great if you just want to move things quickly, because we can use it with cut. Let's take Robert here, for example. If I want to cut, slightly different keyboard shortcut, Control X. Or we can use the scissors from the home ribbon, or we can right click and cut. All have the same effect, and at the moment it just looks the same as a copy. But the difference is if we move across here, and let's do the quick paste, which is just enter. Robert gets pasted, but you can see he's gone from B4 because we cut him and we pasted him. That's cut and paste. We could do the same with 43. We cut, we move where we want to go, and enter for paste. Nice and quick and easy. Now that's just using one cell at a time. We could take all of those, Control C. So I've got all of those cells there. Let's go into another sheet called paste. Come across to here. Now I don't need to highlight the same number of cells. You can see here I've got 13 cells highlighted. I come into paste. I don't need to highlight the same number. I just need to tell it where to start. So I'm going to tell it to start at E3 and then paste. And you'll see everything appears in the same relative order. If I were to move over here and paste, it starts with Mavis and then I have the same gap. 3 to Sally, 3 to the date and 2 to this eggplant. We know why those little hashes have appeared because there's a date in there and the column isn't wide enough to display it. Multiple cells can be copied and then pasted, and you don't have to figure out the new paste area. You simply start with a single cell and it pastes everything relatively from that point on. That would work horizontally as well as vertically. Now there's one other thing I'd like to show you with Excel's copy and paste. If you copy a single cell, so let's take Mavis again. Let's go into the paste sheet and scroll down a little. So I've got Mavis on the clipboard, a single cell with Mavis in. I then highlight any number of cells and then paste, and I can use the Excel quick paste, the straightforward enter, Because I had a single cell and I've now highlighted multiple cells, it pastes that single value into every cell in that range. So we know we can chop up a text string using the left and the right functions to take a part from the beginning and a part from the end, but we can't use the left and the right functions for stripping parts of a date. So for example, here in our employees, if we wanted to pick up the month, we couldn't use the left function, although it looks like the month is on the left, because it's actually a number behind that DOB, and we actually want part of the formatting when you're dealing with dates that it's not dealt as a text option. So if we want to extract part of a date, let's insert ourselves 3 columns and look at extracting the month, the day, and the year as 3 separate parts that we can then perhaps sort differently, do some further calculations on. So taking the person's date of birth, we want to know what month they were born in. We can simply use the month function based on the DOB value, close brackets, return. Now it looks like it's chosen the wrong thing, but this is down to the formatting problem again. So let's actually highlight all 3 of those cells and change them to general. And you see that the month is now month 8. The day function is actually day of the DOB, close brackets, return, and it tells me that the day of the month is 2. And I can narrow that up. And then the year is year, open brackets, DOB, close brackets, return, and we get the year. Take all 3 of those functions and send them to the bottom, and we get everybody's month, day, and year as a separate value in separate columns. So we could then do perhaps separate sorting, sort by day, sort by month, sort by year separately to sorting by the whole date of birth. Now if you were to try put them back together, so if we inserted another column here and call that DOB2, we might attempt the concatenate functions, that's equals, as all functions start with an equals, concatenate the month, comma, a slash, comma, the day, comma, another slash, comma, the year. Putting back together the 3 parts of the date with slashes in between, return. Now you can see that although it has worked and displays as a date, it's not being treated as a date because it's left aligned. And even though we can replicate that function to the bottom and it works through and these values look the same as those values, they cannot be treated as the same as those values because they are actually text values. If you wanted to actually put back together the portions that make up a date and for them to turn out to being a full date, we can't use the concatenate function. Insert a new column. What we can do, let's call this DOB3, is use the date function. So that's equals date, open brackets, and we can get the date function to pick up the 3 portions of a date that are required, which is the year, comma, the month, comma, the day, close brackets. No need to tell it what the date partitions are, like a slash or a hyphen. We simply pick up 3 parts of a date in the correct order, return, and you can see that is then turned into a proper date. And we can replicate that to the bottom. So there we have a full circle really, the ability to take apart a date into its 3 components of a month, day, and year, and then the ability to put dates back together based on the 3 components. A very useful function that exists in Excel and has for a while, but has never been included in any Excel documentation, is the date diff function. Now the date diff function allows you to calculate the difference between 2 dates and display them in whatever format you're interested in. So whether you want to display them in days, in months, or in years. Just before we look at the date diff function, I'd like to show you one other function that we're going to use, and that is the function to get today's date. So in the second sheet of your employees working file, which is called today, we can get today's date by doing a keyboard shortcut, which is Control and semicolon. And that places today's date, November the 15th, 2013, in the cell. I press return to accept that. However, that is a static value and will stay at November the 15th, 2013 until I change it. So in 3 weeks' time, it will still say November the 15th, 2013. If, however, for it to change to today's date when we get to tomorrow, I can use a function called today. So that's equals today. Now, just like the other functions you've seen already, it has an open bracket. However, it differs in that it then has a closed bracket with nothing in the brackets. So it's a straightforward function to produce today's date. And when I return, I get the same date, 11/15/2013. The difference between the two cells, though, is that A2 is a function, so we'll always have today's date in there, and A1 is a static value and will always stay as November the 15th. Now we're going to use the today function in our new dateDiff function. So we go back to the employee sheet, where we can see we have their dates of birth, but we'd like to see their ages. When we talk about humans, we talk about ages. So let's go create ourselves a new column. Insert column, new column heading of age. And then we can calculate people's ages by looking at their date of birth and finding out the difference between when they were born and today in whole years. We only worry about the whole years when we look at human ages. So the function is equals dateDiff, open brackets. Now you'll notice that because this is not officially a supported Excel function, nothing appears when you open the brackets, whereas when you create any other function, when you open the brackets, it gives you the criteria that are required. Now you have to know the criteria. So the criteria are actually 3 steps. The first part is the oldest date, which is going to be the person's date of birth, which is E2. Then comma. The second part is the second date, so the newest date that you're trying to find a difference between, which in our case is today's date. So we can actually place the function today inside the dateDiff function, and then comma. So we're actually asking it to find the difference between E2, which is the person's date of birth, and today's date, but we need to tell it which part of the date we are interested in. Well, we're only interested in the year, so we put a little set of speech marks, Y, and another set of speech marks, and then close brackets. Now in this third part, you can actually have D if you want to know the number of days between the two dates, M if you want to know the number of months between the two dates, so that's full months, and you can put YD, which is the days, take away the full years, and MD, which is the days, take away the full months. So it's sort of the remaining days once you take away the months. In our case, we've asked for how many full years are there between E2, Wendy's date of birth, and today. When we press return, it tells us it's February 16, 1900. Now the reason for that is because Excel in its helpful way has actually pre-formatted this cell as a date format. Now we've seen this previously in the formatting, in that the date format already applied to this cell is not what we're after. So we can change that by going up to the quick format option here and just choosing general. And you can see that it tells us that Wendy is 47. I can then replicate this formula to the bottom, double click on the little fill handle, and it then, as all functions are relative, works out the age of each of our employees. So Mary Wallace is 58, Robert Clark is 38. And when we look at the formula, you can see it's moving down relatively to now look at their date of birth. The today function is a fixed function producing today's date, and the Y is a fixed value producing the full number of years. So this is the very useful, although undocumented, dateDiff function. Taking the conditional formatting in a slightly diverse angle, we can actually use conditional formatting to place data bars or color scales behind a range of values. So instead of picking on a cell and saying, let's change it based on its value against a set of criteria, we can change the background based on its relevant value compared to other values in a range. This will make more sense when you see it in action. Taking the sales data file 2013 and February this time, if, for example, we wanted to compare the north values against each other graphically, we've seen how we can add a spark line or actually even do a full chart if we want, or we can conditionally format these cells relative to each other using the conditional formatting option and coming down to data bars or color scales or icon sets. Each of these effectively does a relative comparison. So if, for example, we were to choose gradient fill and the green bars, you can see here in the preview as we move that 757 is much more solid green than 245, and the 5 has a very faint little bit of green on the left hand side of it. And you can do the same with the blue gradient, or even use the solid colors. The color scales do a very similar thing. You can see that you get different solid colors across the range. It's not so obvious there graphically which is the better value, but that has a green, yellow, red color scale, a green, white, red color scale, a red, white, green color scale, and then there's even yellow to green, green to yellow. I'm not a fan of the colour scales because it's not graphically obvious what the difference is between the colours. Whereas the data bars, that's immediately obvious. The more colour, the higher the number, the less colour, the lower the number. And again, the icon sets work in a very similar manner. You choose an icon set and you can see you get a different icon for the value. And this one is a set of traffic lights of different shapes, or the arrows. You can see the green up arrow is obviously higher than the red down arrow, and then the yellow arrow to the side. Or there's grayscale versions, or there's circles with different colours, or there are indicators, rating flags, different shapes on the side there, or even the star rating option here. So you get a full star there for 757, but 5 is pretty empty, and 245 is actually quite empty as well. You got radial moon options or little bar options. So some of the icon sets work better than others, depending on your data usually. And then the data bars with gradient or solid fill certainly makes a lot more sense. So let's go for a gradient fill of pink on the north. What we can then do with the south is highlight the south data, come to conditional formatting, and let's choose a different set of data bars. Let's go with blue. And then the east, conditional formatting, data bars, let's go yellow. And the west, conditional formatting, data bars, green. Now, as these values change, the data bars will change as well. So if the bike sold for the west dropped down to 200, but the planes sold went up to 180, then the relative scale between the bars for, in this case, the west, would change, because it's all about relativity with the bars behind. These work on a range of cells and effectively give a different icon or bar or gradient fill depending on the value within the range of cells that you've chosen. Whereas the original, let's make this change colour if it's over 55, effectively works on that single value compared to a criteria. So we've actually carried out quite a few formula, taking you from using the basic operators, considering the problems of BOD maths, so brackets, operand, division, multiply, addition and subtraction, introducing you to sum functions, which we saw in use, not to mention the AutoSum facility, and then we looked at adding our functions and then copying and pasting those functions to make life a little easier for you. Now there is one drawback to functions in Excel, and that is when you're looking at a sheet, as we are now, Math Sample E, sales sheet, we don't actually know, without clicking on a cell, which cells contain formula and which cells contain numbers. So I'd actually have to physically click on a cell and look in the formula bar to see if it contains a formula or a number. So this one contains a number, which might not seem too much of a problem, but what happens if somebody makes this a static 7.6, which currently is correct, but if we then buy more oranges, the result here in the total does not change because we've removed the formula, we've deleted it, we've overtyped it. Whereas the apples, they still have a formula in, we go 6, the total changes. So we don't know that that 7.6 or $7.60 is static or a formula without actually clicking on the cell, which is not ideal. If you use the keyboard, you can use the control key and the back quote key. Now the back quote key is the key situated just to the left of the 1 key. So if you use that key and the control key, you'll find that all of your formulas are revealed, and that makes your 7.6 stick out like a sore thumb. Now in this mode, you can't see what the results are. You can only see the formulas. So I can see the sum formulas here. I can see the multiplication formulas here. And I can actually still work on the sheet. It's just that I happen to be now displaying the formulas. And that same little keyboard shortcut, Control and the back quote key, returns you back to calculating mode. Now it looks like that table that was there has disappeared, hasn't it? It's just scrolled across because the columns are wider so that we can fit the formulas in. Now there is a menu method for doing the same thing. It's File, Options, Advanced, scroll right down the advanced options until we get to here, which is Show Formulas in Cells instead of their calculated results. One little tick, OK. And we get to exactly the same place as the keyboard shortcut took you, which is Control and the back quote key. Now, it's not always the case that you want to see all the formulas. Sometimes it's just the formula for one cell that you're after. So I might want to know what this formula here is, but what I don't want to do is expose all the formulas in the sheet. Well, we can do that by using another function. Now that function is actually called formula text. So if I go into cell F6, I can say equals, and you can see it appears, formula text, opens a bracket, need to tell it which cell to look at. So I tell it to look at this cell here, close the bracket and return, and it then displays for me the formula for that cell there. Widen that slightly. So then that stays on the sheet at all times, and if this formula ever changes, I will see the result here because it's a formula checking for the formula. So if I go into there, for example, and actually let's accidentally only get it to add up the first two. And when I press return, the formula text cell, the one here that's checking to display that formula, changes as well, because it too is a formula, but it's been asked to check another cell and display its formula. So that's a third way of doing. We have the keyboard shortcut, which displays all of the formulas or none, the file options long-winded method, which displays all of the formulas or none, and this clever little one-off function that you can use for displaying single formulas from single cells. So it's equals formula text, open brackets, the cell you would like the formula for. Let's use the same working file, cut, copy and paste. Now we're going to look at drag and drop. We saw before that we could cut, move across to where we want to go, press enter, and it would effectively cut and then paste. Now we can do that a lot quicker with our mouse by selecting a cell, then go into the border. We need the four-headed arrow as you've got there. Once you have that position, you can click and hold on. You'll notice that the cursor changes to an arrow then, and then you can move that cell to somewhere else. That's drag and drop. So you're looking for a four-headed arrow, then click and hold on, then move, and then let go. You can do that with areas as well as a single cell. So I could take Sally, move her up to there. I could take the 43, move it up to there. Then I could highlight all three of those. I'll get a four-headed arrow. I can then grab and move all three of them together. So that's drag and drop for a single cell or an area of cells. Now, drag and drop as it stands is effectively the same as cut and paste because it's moving the contents to somewhere else. If you wanted to copy the cell contents, then we effectively do the same thing. We select the cell, go to the edge, click and hold on, then hold down the control key. And you'll notice a little plus has appeared next to my arrow. When I now move, as long as I let go of the mouse first, the cell is copied. So I can copy using drag and drop. Again, it's not restricted to single cells. I could do that with multiple cells. So let's bring those three over here. Then select all four of them. Go to the edge, click and hold on. Hold down the control key because I would like to copy. Move across to the right somewhere, let go of the mouse first. And that way I create a copy of the cells. So these stay where they are. The new ones appear here. I need to widen slightly. Now I can drag anywhere within the sheet, even if I can't see it, because if I drag to the right, for example, you'll see the columns just scroll across. If I drag down, you'll see the rows just go up, up, up. So I can drag anywhere I like within my sheet. If you hold the Alt key down, you can actually drag to another sheet. Then I can come where I like and let go. So let's take this eggplant, grab it, drag it and drop it where I like in this sheet, hold down the Alt key, and I can drag it to another tab and then across and let go. Drag and drop within the same sheet or within different sheets within the same workbook. I can drag and drop to move cells, whether that's multiple cells or single cells, or I can hold down the control key. I can actually copy the contents of a cell, one location to another, using the drag and drop option. Whilst working with Excel, there will be times when you need to edit the contents of a cell. So that's not just replace them, but just edit what's already in there. Now we have to be a little bit careful in Excel when we want to edit a cell, in that we don't replace the total contents. Let's take our sample cells with data as an example. On the forecast sheet, we have Bob, Rita and Sue. Now it may be that I wish to add in Bob's surname. So I could just click on the cell and type his surname, which is actually Haywood, and press return. And then what happens is Haywood drops into the cell, not Bob. Bob has actually gone. So if we go back, because we just clicked on the cell and started typing, as we mentioned before, when entering data, the data sits above the cell until you press enter or tab or click the little tick, and then that data drops in. So if you're editing the contents of a cell, you cannot just click on and start typing and then return, because that will replace the cell contents. If you want to add to the cell contents or augment the cell contents, then we need to actually get into the cell. So to get into the cell, we can either double click, and that will take us in. You can see the cursor is then in the cell, and I can add his surname. And then I press return. It then says Bob Hayward. So let's go back. There are a number of ways of getting into the cell. So you've seen double click works. We could select the cell and then go up to the formula bar at the top and click into the formula bar. And then you can space and type his surname. Or we can again click on the cell, and then to get in, there is a keyboard shortcut of F2. And that drops you into the cell. So we're into Bob's cell. Let's add his surname. Return brings us down. Let's just widen that slightly. Then on the top of Rita's cell, I'm going to edit her cell. Let's do the F2. Cursor drops in. Rita Brown. Return brings me down to Sue's cell. Let's add her surname up here. Sue Green. And again, I could press return, or I can click the little tick. And that's effectively the same as return, but I don't move down to the next cell below. I stay on that cell, but I've entered the contents. So that's editing cell contents. F2, double click, or up in the formula bar. If you happen to be on a numeric cell and you want to make a change, it's the same thing. Keyboard shortcut in this case, F2, drops me into the end, and I could move along to the beginning, delete the 6 and put a 7. And again, return. So it's just that little nuance you have to be careful of, actually getting into the cell to make the change rather than being on top, making the change, and then all that drops in is the new typing, not the existing typing as well. We know we can format our Excel worksheet using colours for the background, the font colour, the typeface, but they all fall under a sort of larger banner of theme. So when you go to choose a cell or number of cells, if we take our sales data 2013 as an example file, when we want to control the background colour, we click the background colour choices and we see there are a choice of theme colours or standard colours, and the same with the font, theme colour or standard colours. And you'll even find that under the typeface choices, there are theme fonts and then all fonts. The idea behind a theme is if you keep to the theme, so you keep the same typefaces that are on offer and the same colours that are on offer, you can actually switch themes and all the colours will change consistently. So we have tried to stay with the theme colours. So I change these to a sort of green from the theme choices. If I then want to change the theme, then I'll be changed to whatever colour falls into that same little slot there. Try and think of these as a set of numbers, and then each number can be swapped for a different colour when you change the theme. Now the themes that your sheet responds to are actually under the page layout ribbon, and you can see here themes, and in the drop down there are a number of themes to choose from. There is an office theme, facet, integral, ion, and you can see as I move through the themes, the colours on my sheet behind are actually changing. And because I've stayed within the current themes choices, the colours will change to the new colour scheme. So let's go with slice, and you can see that the colours have changed quite dramatically. And on the home ribbon, you'll see your new colour choices in the theme slots. I'm still in the same position here as I was previously on the other theme, but I've now got a different colour in that slot. And the same for the font colour. I'm in this slot here, whatever colour that happens to be. The typeface has also changed for this particular theme, because the theme fonts are actually Century Gothic as opposed to Calibri. So the typeface and the colours have been changed by the theme. Now within each theme, so if I go back to the page layout, you'll see you can choose a main theme. You can even browse for themes that you might have on your machine and save the current theme if you've made a few changes to it. So although you might think there are only 10 themes to choose from, and I'm currently on the slice, within the slice theme, I can then choose a subset of colours. And those subset of colours are Office, Office 27 to 2010, or grayscale, or blue, red, blue, and you can see as you move down the colours, it's affecting the sheet behind. Now this patch of colours here, if I pick yellow and orange for example, and go back to the home, that patch of colours feeds into this top line here, and then you have different tints of that same colour choice. So it's not just a set of colours, you have control over a colour scheme, and you can even customize these colours should you so wish, by setting the different accents, the different background colours, and even hyperlink colours. Now within your theme, you can also control the fonts. by going Calibri Light, Cambria, and again, as you choose down the list, it's affecting the background. So we could change the default font for the current theme to Kandara, and you can see that that affects my sheet. And on top of that, the last thing for our themes are effects. Now you can see that as you move through, nothing is actually affected because these effects affect objects. So the thing we need to do now is actually insert an object. So let's go to the Insert ribbon, Illustrations, Shapes, and we'll choose a simple rectangle and draw that over here. Now you'll find, if we go back to the page layout and come down to the effects, and as we step through the effects, you'll see that our shape over to the right there is actually responding to the change of effect. The glossy one has the biggest change. So we go back to Office. That's the default effect for effectively new objects. So if you were then to change the theme, you see the object color changes as well to the color that is sat in the same color slot on the color scheme. So it's that consistency as you move from sheet to sheet. So things look the same color, same typeface, same size, etc. Sometimes in Excel, when you type a number in, Excel will mess around with it, change it, adjust it, alter its formatting because it feels that the number should be treated differently. Now you might have seen this occur already if you've been using Excel. If I were to put a telephone number in with some leading zeros and then return, what you will notice is that Excel removes the leading zeros. Excel has said you've typed a number, you don't need those leading zeros, let's take them away. Now I don't always want it to do that. What I want it to do is to leave those leading zeros out because this is a telephone number. Now there are two ways of telling it effectively to leave alone what you're doing. First of those is if you do it as you type, you can type the single apostrophe first and then type in what you want. When I press return, you'll see that it left aligns. The little apostrophe is not on display. It is if you click and have a look in the formula bar, you can see the little apostrophe at the top there, but it's not displayed in the cell. And you get one of these little warning symbols that says it's stored as text. So that's what that little apostrophe does. It says, treat what I'm about to type as text. That's why it's left aligned it. That's why it's not removed the leading zeros. It's not trying to treat it as a numeric value. The other way of doing it is to actually pre-format the cell as a text cell by selecting the cell, going up to the little number format section here on the home ribbon, come down all the way to text, and then when you go back into that cell and type exactly the same thing, no little apostrophe needed this time, and return, you'll see the text remains on the left, it's left aligned, it's been treated as text, and we get the same little warning that says the number is stored as text. So you either put the single apostrophe or you pre-format that cell to treat all the contents as text anyway. You'll find that it does this messing around with your numbers, with dates as well. If we were to type a bank reference number, the minute I press return, it goes and changes it completely because Excel thinks that the little hyphen is a date differential and says, oh, September the 21st, 1993. Well, no, I didn't. I meant 09-21-93. So I need to do the same thing again. Either I use the little apostrophe and then type in what I want it not to touch. So 09-21-93. And you'll then see it gets shown and displayed and treated as, in this case, a bank reference number. Or I could do, as we did before, pre-format the cell to tell it to treat all the contents as text. And then I can type in what I want and it won't do anything at all to it. Now that pre-formatting as text is quite useful. But on the other side of the coin, if you open an Excel file that has some cells pre-formatted as text and you start typing numbers in and they start jumping to the left and they start not being able to be calculated on, then just check that someone hasn't done that they haven't selected the cell and set it to be text, because that will tell Excel to ignore any number formatting. So it's either the single apostrophe, which doesn't display on the sheet but does display in the formula bar, or pre-format the cell as text, just to stop Excel from manipulating what it thinks is a number, but you're using it as some kind of reference, such as a telephone reference, a bank reference, could be an invoice reference that is made up of numeric digits that Excel will then want to convert into a proper number by losing any leading zeros or changing hyphens into slashes so it suddenly becomes a date. So there's two little things to watch for when you're entering data into Excel. When dealing with text, numbers and dates, Excel acts differently. So it's worth exploring how to enter text, numbers and dates into Excel. So you default book 1 and let's start in A1 and I'm just going to type my name. Once you've typed some text, whether that be text or numbers or a date, it's not actually accepted into the cell until either we press return or, let's go put Guy here as well, we press tab on the keyboard and that takes us out of the cell but to the right instead of downwards. Or one more, we click the little green tick here, which effectively says accept what I've typed in. There are 3 ways really of making sure the text enters the cell. Until you actually carry out the enter process, the text is just sat above the cell and will not actually drop in. So it's return, tab, or the little tick at the top. Enter in a number, and then again tab or enter. So I'm going to tab, so I'll go to the right, and the number drops into the cell. Now what you will notice is that the text has left aligned and the numbers have right aligned. By default, text will always go to the left and numbers will always go to the right. Now with dates, pretty much a similar thing happens. Tab or enter, and you can see the date drops in. Now you can't really tell where it's left or right aligned, but let's just widen the column and then you can see the date is right aligned. We can override the formatting when we look at formatting cells, but text will by default go to the left. Numbers by default will go to the right and dates will go to the right. Now what happens if we then type in more text than the width of the column? It doesn't actually enter the second cell here, and we can show that it doesn't by actually typing something else in. And then you cannot see the rest of my surname because it has to run behind. So the text is there, we can see that at the top here in what's called the formula bar. But when there's something in the adjacent cell, the text will run behind that cell. When there's nothing in the adjacent cell, you see that it runs across the front of the cell. But that's only for text. Now we can look at how to deal with that, like widening the column or auto-fitting or wrapping. Now with a large number, if I were to type in too big a number to fit in the cell, and then tab or return, what you'll notice is the number gets changed into scientific notation to make sure that it fits. So it displays in the same width by effectively chopping the number down into scientific format. So now we get 8.28749, E plus 21, means that there are 21 zeros to go on this 8 before you get to a whole number. Now what would happen if a date was too wide? Well, the date can only be so wide, we can't type in a longer date, but I can make it narrower. So the date can't fit, and what you'll notice is it's going to hashes. So a number that cannot fit will not run over the end of the cell. What you'll find is Excel here has changed it to scientific notation. It's made that scientific notation even shorter. We've now got 8E plus the 21, but the date has turned into hashes, and all these hashes mean is that the cell is not wide enough to display the numeric or date contents. With text, it doesn't care, it'll just let it run over to the next cell or run behind the next cell. So whenever that occurs, you will need to widen the column or reduce the font size. Either of those will help the date or the number to actually fit within the cell. So that's entering text, numbers and dates, and just a little bit on how Excel handles those dates and numbers. Being able to use Excel to store data up to 1 million plus lines will mean that we will need to filter some of that data away so that we're not interested in seeing all of it at one time. Now, although our data here in employees actually only equals 105 employees, we can still filter out some of those employees. Now, the filtering works on a column basis. So we would look at, for example, street or town and city and filter out values that don't match those that we're searching for. Now, the first step to filtering is to activate the auto filter icons, and that's done from the home ribbon where we have sort and filter and choose filter. And you can see that nothing actually happens other than these little drop down arrows appearing at the top of every column. What they will allow you to do, if we take the town city as an example, is to click in, view all the unique town and cities. So these are the unique values regardless of how many times they appear in the list. If they appear at least once, then they appear in this filter option. And what I can do is remove the tick from a select all and then hand pick those towns that I wish to filter by. So effectively I'm looking for people who live in Durham, Hartlepool, Leeds and Manchester. OK, and the filtering takes place. Now I know there's filtering in place because the row numbers go blue. So there's my indication. In the status bar at the bottom left, it says however many of however many records. So in this case, 33 of 106 records. and the filter on the column that is being filtered by has a little filter icon. So instead of a drop down arrow as the others have, we have a filter icon on the town city column. Now you can compound your filters by choosing another column. So this town city filter will be in place, and even if I go to another column such as, for example, date of birth, where I see all the unique years, so I could pick an individual year, or you can expand out, for example, 1980, and I can see December within there, 1976 as February and August, so that's based on the data within that column. Or I can go to date filters, and there are some pre-built filters such as this month, next month, last month, next quarter, but those options really are based on sales data that is up to date. These are dates of birth, and the youngest person is in their 20s, but we could go for a between option and say everyone whose date of birth is after January the 1st, 1971 and is before December the 31st, 1978. Then OK, and that filter is now in place, got a little filter icon on there, and we have less employees. We've only got 12. So all of these employees meet both criteria, so they have to fall into both camps, both the town filtering and the date of birth filtering. Should you wish to remove any filtering, then you go to the filter that you wish to remove, so town city in this case, and we can clear the filter from town city, or we can make further changes, perhaps choosing different towns. So let's clear that filter. That will bring all the town filtering back, and we're now only filtering on the date of birth filter. So people born between 1971 and 1978, and there are 22 of them. To remove the date of birth filter, I simply go in there and choose clear date of birth filter, or I can go into date filters, between, and actually edit the current contents. So there are a number of options. If I have a number of filters in place, and notice they do compound, so that filter works with that filter, works with that filter, and I want to remove them all at once, I can simply go to sort and filter and clear, and that will clear all filters that are in place. And then I can see all my data has returned because the row numbers are now black and green when highlighted, but they're not blue. And I could remove these little drop lists if I don't want them. I go into sort and filter and just click in the filter option again, and that turns off the filtering capability. So any of your columns can be filtered by simply turn on the filtering, which is done on the home ribbon or the data ribbon, where we can turn on filtering. That places the little drop down arrow, which then gives you the capability to filter. Let's choose the salary this time. This being a numeric field, it shows all the unique values, or we can go into number filters and choose equals, not equal, greater than, or equal to, less than, etc. All the comparison filters there are built in straightforward English, so you know what you're going to get. So I'm going to go less than 20,000. So anybody who earns less than $20,000 will now appear in my filter set, and there are 52 of those employees. And you can look down the salary and see that that is true. And then in the sex column, I'm going to choose 1, so remove 2 effectively. So that's only males. Okay. And I'm now looking at males who earn less than 20,000, and there are 25 of them. Once you've done some filtering, you can actually take a copy of that data by selecting it all, which is Control A. Let's insert a new sheet. Back in employees, with it still selected, I'm going to do a copy. So Control C. I can then paste. And you'll see that we only get the 25 employees that match the criteria of the filter. So even though we did a Control A to select all, it only selects those visible rows. But when we then copy and paste into a new sheet, it pastes them in without all the gaps and without all the filtering. So it's a useful way of effectively taking an extract from your data. Not so dramatic when there's only 106 to start with, but if there were thousands or tens of thousands, or even reaching the million, this is a great way of filtering that data down into a more workable data set. We know how we can make use of the find facility to find text values in our sheets or in our workbooks, but we can also make use of the same tool to find particular formats that we might be looking for. So we need to bring up the find dialog box to start with, which is on the home ribbon, and find and select and find brings the find dialog box up, or Control F on the keyboard. So using the Find dialog box, which might or might not have its options expanded, we'll contract them just in case, and then options to view. You need the options expanding to be able to search for formatting. Over on the right here, we have a format option, which has a little drop down. Now we can choose the format from a particular cell, and it will look for exactly the same format that that cell has. Now that's sort of okay, but it only looks for cells with exactly the same format. It may be that we're only looking for part of formatting that we're interested in. It may be that we're interested in finding out every bit of text that is bolded. Instead of selecting choose format from cell, we're going to choose format, which will bring the format dialog box. And in here I set my requirements. So the requirement is that I'm looking for text that is bold. Okay. And then find next finds me the next cell that is bold, which is that one there. Next, next one there, next one there. Now currently I'm searching the whole workbook. We know we can restrict that to the current sheet or stick with the whole workbook. Now, because we know there's a lot of bold cells, it might be easier to click Find All. And what that does is it finds every single occurrence that is bold. Let's move this box up and just open it a little bit. And you can see here the name of the file. So it's all the same file, sales data G, different sheets, January, February, and March. And then different cells on each of those sheets is bold. And it even gives me the value and the formula within that cell. So I may be interested in this one here, 1523 on February. And one click anywhere along the line, which is to that cell E4 on the February sheet. So that's using Find All. So the Format search tool is Select, Format. And because I've already searched for bold, it remembers that. So before you do any further formatting searches, always remember to clear the Find Format first, otherwise it will retain that bold setting. So everything you look for will then have to still be bold. So I'm going to clear that, then go back into the drop down and choose Format and ask it to search for everything that is in white. So that's the only change, white text. OK, Find All. It then searches through the whole workbook because that's the setting I've got to find all the cells that have white text. And we can see there's quite a few of those as well. We can link through, we can just click and it will take us. Current contents is North. Notice there's no formula in any of these, so no formula is displayed. But I see the text content. So total A7 January, February sales for Ink Corp A1 in February. Let's click and we're taken to that cell there, February sales for Ink Corp in February. So that's the ability to find formatting values within a whole workbook. The reasons that you might want to do that is you might be looking for a particular typeface that you want to replace, or a particular font size that you want to replace, or a particular color. So that's why you would want to use the find for formatting as opposed to just the text values within a cell. Don't forget to always clear the find format, otherwise it will retain those settings the next time you come to the find box. And then I can close the find all section. So if I go back in, you'll see it reverts back to no formatting set. And I can effectively now use that same box to search for text values. Now if we want to carry out a replacement, perhaps we want to swap everything that's bold for italic, or everything that's got this brown background for a light blue background. Then we use the same dialog box, but we go into replace. And here we have find what and replace with what. Well, we're interested in the formatting section up here, so we click the format, choose the format. I'm looking for bold items. Now we know already that there's quite a few bold items because we did a search for bold items. But I'd like to replace them by choosing format with italic. So effectively I'm going to go through the whole workbook and replace everything that's bold with italics. So the first step is to find the next occurrence, and it finds this cell here, E3, and then I can click replace. Now clicking replace does two things. It makes the replacement of bold for italic, and you can see that cell has gone from bold to italic, but it also is the same as clicking find next, because it then jumps to the next bold item. And I can click replace, and it jumps to the next bold item. So I could step through replacing all the bold items one at a time, or I could simply just trust that I found them all and go replace all. 22 further replacements, that doesn't count the two we already did. So 22 further replacements of bold text for italic text. Now if I want to instead make a replacement of this background color, then I firstly need to clear find format, clear replace format, and then I have to pick, using the format, the correct fill color for that brown there, which is that one. Okay. I then go to format, format, fill and choose a different background color, a nice blue there. Don't forget the foreground will still be white. And let's go darkish green. Okay, so you can see in the preview, anything that's currently that dark brown background will now become a dark green background. I could do the little find next to see if it can find a cell, and then replace. And you can see it's done it for West, and then replace for total. And then it goes back to the top and starts again. So I'm quite happy that this is working. I would do replace all. 26 further replacements, so that's on top of the ones we already replaced ourselves. So that's using the replacement tool. So I've used find to find formatting and then replace to replace one formatting with another. And you can see how easy it is to do that throughout a whole workbook. Because of Excel's spreadsheet size, with 16,000 plus columns and over 1 million rows, it ideally lends itself to the storage of data without the need to actually have a custom database built. Anybody dealing with lots of information will be fairly familiar with using Excel as a database package. It doesn't have the same querying and reporting options, but it is great for manipulating the raw data. So if we take our employees data file, which is available in your working folder, we're going to have a look at some of those exploration options. First of which is the ability to effectively freeze the headings on the page. So as you're dealing with a spreadsheet of information, as we have here, as you scroll down, the top row disappears. So then you don't know what each of the columns is about. And if you scroll to the right, the columns on the left disappear. And then you're not really sure who this is that lives in West Yorkshire because you can't see their name. So we need to look at the ability to freeze rows and columns. Luckily, on the view ribbon, there is a freeze panes option. Now it has a drop down arrow because of the option to freeze panes. Now if you choose the first option here, where your cursor is on the page is important because that's the point it will freeze things at. Luckily, however, there are two nice options, which is to freeze the top row. And if I choose that option, you'll see you get a faint horizontal line below the top row. And as you scroll down the page and back up the page, the top row, so row 1, remains frozen on the screen. So at all times, you can see the column headings. Now the other option here, which requires no placement of the cursor, is to freeze the first column. So if we choose that option, then the first column gets frozen. And as we scroll to the right, you see the ID remains on the screen at all times. Now that's fine and it works great, except if what you're after freezing is not the top row or not the first column. I would prefer to be able to see the first 4 columns really, so that I can see the whole name as I scroll to the right. So as I go to the right here, I'd still like to be able to see the name of the person's row I'm on. So first thing to do is to unfreeze what's been frozen. From the freeze panes option, I can unfreeze the panes. And we go back to being normal rows and columns. Now I want to place the cursor in the right place to do what I want. If, for example, I place the cursor here in E2, then go to freeze panes and choose freeze panes, so not one of the two choices that will freeze either the top row or the first column, what will now happen when I choose freeze panes is all the rows above this point will be frozen on the screen, and all the columns to the left of this point will be frozen on the screen. So row 1 will always be visible, and columns A, B, C, and D will always be visible. So if I choose freeze panes now, we get 2 lines, a horizontal and a vertical, which indicate the frozen points. So when I scroll down, I still see all the column headings. And when I scroll to the right and then the left, I still see the first 4 columns. They do not remove themselves from the screen. So as I keep going to the right, I know whose data I'm looking at. So I can see Mary Smith works in accounts and I can move her to the sales department and I know I'm dealing with the right person because I can see their name. So that's freezing panes. It does matter where the cursor is. If I unfreeze these panes and I just happen to have the cursor here, choose freeze panes and then freeze panes, it gets frozen at this point above and to the left. So now I can scroll up and down and to the right, but this area here remains on the screen at all times and all of these rows remain on the screens at all times. Not what I was after. So if you do it inadvertently in the wrong place, you simply unfreeze the panes. Make sure your cursor is in the right place, then freeze panes. and everything above and to the left of the frozen point remains on the screen at all times. Now, an alternative to freezing panes is actually to split the screen. So let's unfreeze panes. If I place my cursor here, for example, because the split does matter where your cursor is, and click split, it splits my spreadsheet at the point I am at, in this case into 4 blocks. Now these 4 blocks, unlike the frozen panes that keep a row or column or number of columns or number of rows on the screen at all times, what effectively you've done here is create 4 separate scrollable areas. So I could enter this section here and actually scroll down and to the right, and I'm looking effectively in this top half at much lower than I am in the bottom half here. Now that can get quite confusing. So I'm not a massive fan of split screen, but I know people that are, because it does mean you can look effectively at the top of a sheet and then scroll this to look at the bottom of a sheet, and you don't have to see everything in between. So that's split screen, and the split screen will split at the point your cursor is. If I click split screen again, it will remove it. If I click it here, split, that then becomes a split point, and you have 4 areas of your spreadsheet. The preference, however, is to freeze frames, with the option to freeze the top row or the first column, or freeze at the point your cursor is, in which case everything on the left and everything above will remain frozen until you unfreeze frames. We've explored freeze frames, which allows you to fix rows or columns on the screen while you're manipulating the data, but this has no effect on the print copy of your data. If you go to print preview with our employees data, you can see on page 1, this is without any manipulation of the print settings, we have titles across the top, but on page 2, there are no column headings. Page 3, no column headings. Page 4, we've moved along the data, so we do have column headings, but now we can't see who the people belong to. So we need a facility really to freeze headings and possibly columns for the print version. Well, this is achieved from the page layout ribbon and print titles. Print titles section is this area here, rows to repeat at top, columns to repeat at the left. So if I need all of those column headings that are in row 1 to be at the top of every single printed sheet, then I simply click into here, click on row 1, and you can see it puts $1, $1 into rows to repeat at top. If I then would like some of the columns to be on every page, I click in columns to repeat at left and highlight those columns. So let's take B, C, and D, and you can see that it places $B, $D. Okay, no physical change to the on-screen view takes place, but in print preview now, there's the first page, so that looks the same. But on the second page, I have the column headings appearing, and the third, column headings still appear. When we hit the 4th page, which is where we effectively move laterally along the sheet, I can see I have the title, first name, and surname repeated, and then the data that fits on that sheet. Same for page 5, title, first name, surname are repeated, 6, and then on 7, when we've moved laterally across the sheet again, I'm still seeing the title, first name, and surname. So that's repeating the columns and the rows when you print the file, which is done by setting your print titles from the page layout ribbon. One thing to be aware of when setting your print titles is that it cannot be done from print preview. If we go to print preview, and then we know there is an option down here for page setup, from within here we can set some things such as forcing the data to fit in less pieces of paper, the margins, the header, the footer, but what we cannot do on the sheet tab is actually set the print titles whilst you are in print preview. You need to be in the normal view to make those changes, and then in print preview you will see those changes. Just in case you end up here and thinking, why can't I make those changes? It's because you are in print preview. So you need to go back to your sheet and use the print titles dialog box directly. You can see now that these options are available to set your rows that will repeat at the top of every page when you print, and the columns that you will repeat at the left hand side of every page that you print. Once you have a chart as an object in a worksheet, what you will find when you select the chart object is you get 3 nice little shortcut buttons. Now these 3 shortcut buttons do 3 different things. The plus, the top one, if we give that a click, allows you to activate certain chart elements. So at the moment we have the axes activated, the chart title activated, the grid lines activated, and the legend activated. And we can see the legend is here, the grid lines go across, the axes go across the bottom and the left, and the chart title sits across the top here. Now we can turn on or off various chart options here. Turn off the chart title and it disappears. Turn off the grid lines and they disappear. Turn off the legend and you have no key. Turn off the axes and you have no labels. So we can turn on or off the chart elements that we require. So I want the axes there, the axes titles, the data table. You can see that as you hover, like everywhere else in Excel 2013, things happen, but they're not permanent, they're just previewing. Grid lines, let's have the grid lines, they worked for us, and the legend worked for us. Once you've chosen your chart elements, you then click the plus again, and that box disappears. Now with the little paintbrush, if we click that, we have a choice of chart styles. So these are pre-built, and again we can hover and see what effect they're likely to have over our chart. Ooh, that's quite nice with the solid background color. So there's a style option, and then within this same little dialog box, there is a color option. So we can make choices of different colors. You can see how that's affecting the bars. So the colors are effectively a set of colors that refer to your bars. Now those colors will look better without a solid background. So let's choose this one and go into color. And then you can see how the colors affect our set of bars across. So monochromatic means all the bars effectively have the same base color but are different tints, whichever color you decide to go for. And then colorful, swap between a different set of colorful colors. So each bar is a different color in this case. Once you finish with the style and the color options, again, if you click the brush, those disappear. The last little shortcut icon here is a filter icon. If we give that a click, that allows you to effectively turn off some of the series or any of the categories. So if I don't want to see the planes in my chart, I simply remove the tick from planes and then come down to apply, and you can see the planes bar disappears from the structure. Perhaps I'm not interested in the north data. I remove that tick, apply, and the north data is removed from my graph. So we can actually ignore parts of the raw data that make up the chart. Or we can bring them all back and click apply, and all the planes come back and all the north data comes back. And just like the other two shortcut items, if we click back on the filter, our filter dialog box disappears. So these three shortcut icons take you into chart elements, where we can turn elements on or off, or the chart style, so we can change the style of our graph or the color of our graph, or we can actually filter out parts of the data set that we're not interested in. Every part of your chart can have a different set of formatting options. Let's take our chart, which must be selected to make any changes to it anyway. And then from the chart tools, we have two sub-ribbons. We have the design sub-ribbon that we've already seen slightly when changing the chart styles here. So you can quickly choose a different built-in style. We also have the option to switch the row and column. And you'll see what will happen here is we currently have a block area for each region and then a bar for each item sold. If we switch the row and the column, they will swap places, and each block is now an item sold and each bar is a region. So it depends how you want to compare the data, and that's a simple click to switch the row and the column for the data around. We've also seen previously that we can change the chart type and we can move the chart. Now there is another sub-ribbon under chart tools, which is format. This will allow you to customize the coloring in and the borders. Now you have to be very careful about how you change anything here, such as the shapefill, the outline and the effects, because it will depend what you've got selected. Now if you want to know what you've got selected, you simply look up here. We currently have the chart area selected, so that's this whole area. If we click in slightly to there, that's the plot area, and you can see it's a smaller rectangle. It's the part of the graph where the data is plotted. And at the top left, it says plot area. Now anything we do will only affect this area. So if I change the shape fill to a lightish yellow, it affects the plot area. If I click outwards, so that I've got the chart area selected, and then change the shape fill, let's go for a light green, then that fills in the chart area. Now the same goes for our bars. If we choose this bar here, it selects the whole series. So that's all of the bikes sold. I'm not happy with the fact that Excel has given me a grey colour. I can go change that shape fill to a purple, and it fills in the series and updates the legend for me. You can see the little purple block there. Perhaps I'm not happy with the blue for cars. Shape fill, I quite like dark orange. And plain sold, let's go for very dark blue. Any element within our chart can be changed by selecting it first. So I could select the vertical axes. I could change the background to that as well, light orange. I can change the line styles here. See how it changes the line there on the right? The legend. Change its shape fill or its style completely. Now all of these sub-objects, so the legend for example, now also gets a set of handles, so I can actually resize it. The same goes for the key there, although that has to really line up with the data, not a good thing to adjust. If I want to bring on the chart title, then the chart title is adjustable. Now, it can be moved to a different location, perhaps even into the plot area. If I want to change what it says, I click in it, simply a text box, and fill in the chart title, Sales 2013. So the whole of my chart is customizable. All you've got to remember is click on the bit you want to change, come to Chart Tools Format, and we can adjust the fill color, we can adjust the outline, we can adjust the shape effects. So if I want to change the effect of my purple bars, I could give them some shadow. Keep an eye on this little area here if you're unsure on what you have selected by clicking. So I click and it says I've selected the legend. I click, it says I've selected the plot area. I click, it says I've selected the car sold series. None of the formatting affects the data. If I now update my data, now because this is a summary, I'll have to adjust one of the subsections. So we're looking at plain sold for the East. Let's push that to a silly number, 1,200. You'll see the graph in January responded. The summary sheet has responded in the data and in the graph for planes sold in the East. Let's go to February and change the same cell. So that's planes sold in the East. Let's add 1,000 in there as well, just to push our summary up. And then in the cell summary, we can see the East has popped up much larger. So you select an element on the Format sub-ribbon of the Chart Tools ribbon. You can then customize the border, the background color for that particular object. If we take our images inserted file, you'll find that there are a number of worksheets with images, smart art objects, shapes and screenshots already inserted for us to look at and explore formatting each of these objects. Now when it comes to formatting images, shapes, screenshots, smart arts, we need to select the object we wish to format and it will bring up the relevant context sensitive ribbon. In this case, I've selected an image, we get Picture Tools Format. Now if I go to the Shapes sheet and select a shape, you see we get Drawing Tools and Format. So a slightly different set of properties. And then if I select the Smart Art, you'll see we get Smart Art Tools, we get a Design ribbon for changing the design of the Smart Art, and then Format for changing its colors, outlines, etc. Let's go back to the images first. So the images one brings up Picture Tools Format. And in here we can change a picture style section. Here we've got little drop shadows and curves, etc. And that will be applied to the selected image. So I could have a trendy effect. I can control the picture border, choosing from our theme colors or standard colors or different thickness of that border. So I could go quite thick on the border and choose an awful green color. There are picture effects. So we have shadows. You can see with all these effects, they preview as you hover. So there's no need to actually click OK and see if it works for you. You can just hover and let it take effect. So we have reflection, another set of options. And you can see a reflection of the photograph appears below. Bevel, that sort of buttony shape. 3D rotation. And you can see that the picture really then does get twisted about from all angles. Once you find an effect you like, you simply click and that effect then is applied to your image. We can crop images using the crop tool. So you choose crop and then you can actually pull the edges of the image in. You can see this girl will now be missed off. and from that side, and then that girl will be missed off. Perhaps there's too much white area at the top. That's the area I would like to crop to. So I then go back up to crop and actually click the crop tool. And my image gets cropped down. Notice how the effects then get reapplied. So I've still got the 3D rotation and the twist on the style. I can rotate my image. Nothing's actually happening to the image until I click OK, but as I move through the options, I get a preview of where we'll be at. We can change color. You can see you've got different levels of saturation. So 0 saturation will take my image down to being black and white, or I can change the color tone, or I can even recolor the image. We could have a bluey effect, like placing a filter in front of the camera lens. So we'll go into the middle on the saturation, and we'll have no recolor. So any of your images can be affected. You simply select, come up to the picture tools format, and then choose the effect you're after or the recoloring you're after. I'm going to go with that one for the horse. And then the little girl. Have that twist there. And the car can have a little circular blur outline to it. So those picture tools will apply to images you've inserted from your hard drive or from the internet, and also screenshots. Screenshots effectively are classed as pictures. So I could take this screenshot and add an effect, as well as potentially adding a border or the shadowy effects. So that's the picture tools. Now with shapes, it's slightly different. We select the shape, we come to drawing tools, and we have a format ribbon, but this will allow us to change the shape fill. So the color, I've got a yellow one there. The outline, so again I can choose some of the colors, and as I move through we get a preview of what's happening. I can go for a much thicker line and even perhaps dotted. I can affect word art styles. Well, that will not affect this particular box because there's no text. I can actually insert shapes while I've got a shape selected, and I can physically adjust the size. Instead of doing it graphically with my eyes using the corner handles or the horizontal or vertical handle, I can physically change the size here to be exactly what I want it to be. So I want it to be 2 inches high, 2 inches wide. So effectively it's a square. Now the Smart Art graphics also have their own ribbon. They have a double ribbon. So you select the Smart Art graphic, Smart Art Tools ribbon, and it has a design sub ribbon for changing the layout, which we've explored earlier, and then a format ribbon for changing the colors. So for example, here where we have apple as orange, that's driven by the choice of design here. But there's nothing to stop you manually selecting apple, going to the shape fill and choosing a different color. So again, pear, I can manually change the shape fill. Strawberries aren't green, they're red, so strawberries, shape fill, and we'll have a bright red. So even though the theme of the design initially controls the colors of your shapes within the Smart Art, you can use the format sub-ribbon to manually override those options. So each of the graphical objects has their own set of properties. Images, which include screenshots, shapes, and then Smart Art. All the formulas and functions we've looked at so far have been contained within a single worksheet. Even when we've had multiple worksheets in a workbook, we've only done formulas within each sheet that references cells within that sheet. Now obviously Excel's much more advanced than that and can deal with cross-sheet formulas. If we take our sales data 2014, we have in here one sheet for each month of the year, so January, February, March, etc., which gives us our sales for each of the 4 regions for cars, planes and bikes sold. Now we also have a summary sheet at the front, so it's currently blank, but we're going to use this to actually pick up the values for cars sold in January. So that value there, 1761. Now we could just look, come back to here and type 1761, but that in itself is not very clever, because what happens if we sell more or less even? We need the summary sheet to respond to those changes, and the only way to do that is by use of a formula. Now getting one cell to pick up the value from another cell on another sheet is actually fairly straightforward. We start with an equals. All formulas start with an equals. So we're in the cell for cars in January. We type an equal sign. We can then click on January, click on the cell that contains the value we require, which is cars sold total in January, and then do not click back. Once you've selected the correct cell, just press return on the keyboard. And you'll find we can see 1761. We know that's what the value is. When you actually look at the formula, we see equals Jan exclamation mark. So it's equals name of the sheet. And the sheet in this case is called Jan. So that's what we see. Exclamation mark. And then the cell that we're trying to pick up. And in this case, that's B7. So equals Jan exclamation mark B7. Now for February, I could do the same thing. I could say equals, go to February, click on the cell. Or I can type it myself. Equals Feb exclamation mark. As long as you type it spelt correctly, then there isn't a problem. So it's equals Feb exclamation mark. And then the cell I'm trying to select is the same one. That's B7, return. And that's 540. And when I look at February, I can see that that's 540. And we can do the same for March, or we can do March a slightly different way. Equals March, click on the cell, return. We could do April in an even different way. We go to April, and we can actually copy the cell that we're trying to pick up. Come round to the summary, click in here, but I can't just do paste because that will paste the value, and I don't want the value, I want the link to that formula effectively. If I go to paste on the clipboard, I can choose the little drop down, and we can see other paste options here. Paste link is the option I'm after, so I click paste link, and we find that I actually get a formula in there. Equals April exclamation mark B7. You'll also notice that Excel has placed little dollar marks in, and they're not actually required, so I can take them off. But you will find that Excel will always put those in whenever you paste a link formula. I'll use the keyboard shortcut F4 to remove the dollars. And we have April, which is actually the same as March. Now I don't need to do the other months, but you can see the logic and follow that through. So it's equals, name of the sheet, exclamation mark, the cell you're after. We can do it with the mouse, equals, and then go and click on the cell that you want, and then return. Or we can use the little clever bit of copy the cell that you want, and then paste link into the destination. Now, even though we're working across sheets, the formulas are still relative. And because cars, planes, and bikes are alongside each other in each of these sheets, cars, planes, and bikes, then in the summary, I can take the four formulas I've got and replicate them across. And you'll see it brings in the figures for cars, planes, and bikes. And it's looking at Jan C7, and it's looking at Jan D7. So everything has moved relatively across, but the sheet tab name has not moved. That's effectively an absolute, and you cannot use copying and pasting formulas to reference moving a sheet tab, but you can for moving relative cells. So that's one example of multiple sheet formulas. Now if we also look at the multi-sheet formula file, you'll find this has retail sales that are picking up the total sales and multiplying by a profit margin. And on the shopping sheet, it's picking up the tax, which is over here. Now, what would make the management of these files much simpler is if the tax value and the profit margin were actually held separately in a separate sheet, and we have them here as default values in the tax and the profit cells. So the tax is in B3 and the profit is in B4, but in a different sheet. So in my retail sales, let's change the one formula here. Instead of multiplying by L2 that's over there, I delete that. I've got equals B9 in here, multiplied by. We go into the default values, we click on the cell that we're after, and then we press return. It is a habit to avoid that clicking back, because when you click back, you'll then pick up two sheet names and the formula will just get totally confused. And you can see we have the single apostrophes I mentioned earlier because there's a space in the sheet name. And then I want to multiply by B4. What I can't do just yet is to replicate this formula from shop 1 to the total column because it will move the reference to B4 relatively. So I need to fix B4. So F4, or you can type them in. So I'm fixing the reference to B4 on the default value sheet, and then I can replicate that formula across, which means I actually don't need these two cells here. I'm keeping the profit margin separate from the sheet in sort of a default value sheet, a master sheet. And we can do the same for the shopping. So we remove the tax from here. Everything goes to 0. I alter the first formula by removing the reference to J5. So I've still got D2 multiplied by default values, tax cell, return. Just like with the profit margin, I need to fix that B3 before I replicate. So I add my dollars in, and then I replicate the formula, and we see now it calculates using the tax value from B3 on the default value sheet. So if I were to make that change here, and let's up this to 50% so we can see that it's made a difference, look in the shopping, and we see the tax has gone through the roof. So that's multiple sheet referencing, so picking up a value from another sheet and using that in a formula on your sheet. So when it comes to carrying out mathematical functions in Excel, there was probably never a better program created. The first stage is to look at the basic mathematical operators. Now these are broken down into 4. If I come over here in our little sample file here, the math sample file, I'm going to put my operators over here so we know what we're dealing with. We're dealing with plus, minus, times, divide, and a little special one of a little hat, which you'll find above the 6 across the top row of your keyboard, and that's the operand command. So the plus there is for addition, the minus sign for subtraction, the asterisk is your multiplication symbol, and then the / for division, and then the little hat for exponential. So those are our basic 5 mathematical operators. We now need to see them in action. Let's just widen that column. So over on the left, I have a series of numbers. If I wanted to add 2 of those numbers together, I would simply choose a cell where I would like the result to appear, and then start typing the formula. All Excel formulas begin with equals. So the first starting point is an equal sign. What I tell it to do it with are the contents of other cells. How to tell it which cells to use, I use their letter and their row number. So if I want to pick up A1, I just say equals A1. Then which mathematical operator do I want to carry out? I want to carry out a plus and then B1. Now you'll notice that as you type your formula, Excel nicely color codes what it's selecting. Therefore you can see at a glance what's been chosen. So here I'm picking up A1, which has got a blue border, and B1, which has got a red border. When I press return, I see the result, which is 46. So in the cell, I see the result of the formula. In the formula bar up here, I see the formula. And if I do my double click to edit, that actually allows me to edit the formula. So I can edit the formula in the cell, or I can do it in the formula bar at the top. Either way, it's the same result. That's adding equals cell plus a cell and plus another cell if I wanted to. We can take away. Let's do that here. Always start with an equals. This time I'm going to pick my 2 cells up using the mouse, because I can actually click on a cell and you'll see it picks that cell reference up. So equals A1, let's do minus this time. A1 minus C3, and the result is 7. 12 minus 5 is 7. Multiplication equals, pick on a cell. Let's pick on A4, multiplied by B4. Return for it to accept the formula, just as we've done before. When we're entering things, we're entering a formula. And we have 6 by 6 is 36. Let's do a division. Equals 34 divided by 5. So it's not 34 divided by 5, it's B1 divided by C3. It's important that we realize that it's referencing not the current values, but the actual cell references. So if the current values change, the results will change. So again, return for that formula to be accepted, and we get 6.8. The last of our little mathematical operators, exponential, follows the same structure. Equals, one cell, little hat, another cell. So that's 7 in this case, to the power of 4. Return, and it's 2401. Now when you're entering formulas, they take the current values of the cells that they're referencing, and if those cells then change, the answers change. So if I were to go into A5 and change that to 2, and go to A3, you see that's responded straight away, so we've now got 2 to the power of 4, which is 16. But if I then go to A3 and add in 14, nothing's changed as yet. I need to press enter so that the 14 drops into the cell, and the result is 16,384. And we already know 2 to the power of 14 is 16,384. So any changes to any of the cells feeding these formulas will result in a change to the formula result. So 46 there, which is adding A1 and B1. Let's add in 100 to the front of there, and that adds in 100 to the result. Any of the other formulas looking at the same cells will also have their result changed. So this is the start of your mathematical equations in Excel. Everyone must begin with an equals, and then you follow that with the cells that you're dealing with and the operators that you wish to carry out. In the case here, we've simply added two cells, taken one cell away from another, multiplied two cells, done a division of one cell by another, and then the exponential of one cell to the power of another. So the basic 5 operators, if you have these instilled under your belt, and the fact that any cell in the whole of your sheet can be referenced by its column letter and then its row number, then you've got a good grounding in building your Excel mathematical genius. When dealing with multiple graphical objects, we've already seen that we have to take into account the stacking order so that things appear as they ought to appear. One other thing that could be quite useful is the ability to group multiple objects together so that they effectively act as one object, so you can then move it as one object and copy and paste it as a single object. If we take the Group Shapes workbook, you'll find it has a sheet in there called Grouping, which has an image of some bananas, a shape that is the banner shape, and a crescent moon shape. Now we want to add one other thing, which is a text box. So I'm going to go to Illustrations, Shapes, and we'll find that text box is an option here in the recently used shapes, or in the basic shapes. It will bring the same thing up, which if we click and drag, is a rectangle that we can type in. So I'd like to type Guys Republic. Now we can center a line, both horizontally and vertically within our text box, and we can resize so that it fits and looks appropriate. Now I want to interact all of these items. So effectively this is going to be my flag. So I need to move the name of the Republic on it. Notice how it's not currently see-through. Because this is a drawn object, to make it see-through, I go to Drawing Tools, Format, Shape Fill, and choose No Fill. If I click away, I also notice I've got a border. So I need to go to Shape Outline, No Outline. And now I've just got the words Guys Republic, which I can format to white. And let's make them a little bigger. I want to pull the moon onto here, so I bring that across. So far the stacking order has been in my favour, because the moon is in front of the flag, the text box was in front of the flag, and then let's pull the bananas onto here, and the stacking order goes against me, so I need to change the stacking order of the bananas. So that's Picture Tools, Format, let's bring them right to the front, so I can put them on my flag. Possibly need resizing downwards slightly. So that's 4 objects on my Excel sheet that are now creating the flag for Guys Republic. Now if I want to then move that as a whole, I can't at the moment because I select the flag and it leaves all the components behind. So what I need to do really is group all 4 of them together. Now the process here is to shift click each of the 4 items. So I've already got the flag, so I shift click the bananas, I shift click the moon, and you can see all the handles are now being selected, and I shift click the text box. So all 4 objects are selected. If I get the move mouse shape, which is the 4 arrows, I can move them all together, but that's only because I've multiple selected them. I wouldn't want to go through that process every time I needed to move them together. So while I have them multiple selected, let's group them together, which we do on the Format ribbon. Now I've got 2 Format ribbons here, one for Picture Tools and one for Drawing Tools, because I have both pictures and drawing items selected. It doesn't matter which of those Format ribbons you're on, they both have a group option. So with our 4 items selected, we can choose group, and the only option within here is to group them. They are now effectively one item. So I can move the one item, I can resize the one item. Be careful that although each of the individual images and graphical items have resized in proportion, the text hasn't. So I would need to click into the text and reduce the size to suit my new style. But all the other items, the moon, the flag, the bananas, have all resized in proportion. And I can go upwards as well as downwards. And again, the text does not resize. The only thing you need to be careful of is the text within these groupings. But as far as moving and then copying the object, so select the object, which is a group, move across and paste, you see we get the whole object, all 4 items. Now, if at any point you needed to move the moon slightly, I would need to ungroup. So I do that by selecting the group, go to the Format ribbon. Again, it doesn't matter which of the format ribbons you're on, drawing tools or the images. The group little drop down now has an option for ungroup. That ungroups the items. They are still multiple selected, so you would need to click away and then click on the one you want to adjust. I just want to move my moon in a little, perhaps give it a little rotation, and bring the flag size down, bananas down, and then to put them all back together, select all 4 items, go to the format ribbon, group, and regroup, because it knows that they were once a group, and they're back effectively as a single object. So you can group multiple items together to act as a group. They will resize in proportion, they will copy and paste, they will drag about. The only option to be careful of is text within that group will not automatically change its font size when you resize up or down. We've seen how we can widen columns and increase the row height, remove columns, add columns, etc. As well as being able to do all of that, we can actually hide columns and rows from view. Hidden rows and columns do not print, so that would be one reason for wanting to hide them. You know they're hidden when you do it, so it's not like you can't find them, but it's for that printing facility or even just for on-screen use. If we take the employees working file, I might not be interested in seeing Miss Mary Wallace. So I want to hide her row of information. Well, I go to row 7 and select. I can then right click and you'll see there's a hide and unhide option. So I could hide row 7. Now you know row 7's missing because you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. It's not like it's hidden away and you can't tell. We could hide more than one row. Let's take a little patch here. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Right click, hide, and they disappear. Again, we know they're not there because there's a little mark between 13 and 19 and the numbers don't run consecutively. So we can hide rows. We can hide columns. So we select column G. We can right click the little heading here and choose hide. And row G is removed. We can hide multiple columns. So we multiple select the columns, right click, hide, and they're gone. Again, you can tell. We know there are letters missing between N and S. But the advantage is, if we now print, we only print what we can see. So how do we get them back? Well, we click on row 8, right click, unhide, and nothing happens. We click on row 6, right click, unhide, and nothing happens. The reason that nothing happens, Excel doesn't know which of our hidden rows, and we've got quite a few, we would like to return. So I actually need to highlight the before and the after. So I drag from 6 across where 7's hidden into 8. Then when I right click and unhide, you'll find that number 7 comes back because it knows where it is now. It says, oh, you want that one back? Okay, no problem. And the same with our other little set here, 13 to 19. We highlight 13 to 19, right click, unhide. And anything that is hidden between the two selected rows, 13 and 19, is then unhidden. Now, if we just hide 14 again, you'll find there is a little marker there that you can get with your mouse. We can click and hold. You've got to have that cursor in the right place, otherwise you'll just keep increasing the height of 13. Now, as you bring your mouse down, you see there it's a single solid horizontal line along with the up and down arrow. If you move down a little bit further, there, it became a double, 2 horizontal lines. If I click and drag now, I can actually unhide row 14 with the mouse, but you've got to get in just the right place. Same with those columns. If I come across to the hidden columns there between N and S, I can drag. So I've dragged R out, but there's still a big line there. Drag Q out, big line, drag P out, still a big line, and drag O out. And now there isn't a big line there. I can only widen the columns. So that's hiding and unhiding columns and rows.